Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. I had recently moved into a modest apartment on the edge of a small town called Pine Ridge. The building was old, with creaky floors and narrow hallways, but it had a certain charm. The apartment itself was cozy, just enough room to settle in comfortably. The neighbors were quiet, and the town felt peaceful, like a perfect place to escape from the fast-paced world. It seemed like the fresh start I'd been looking for. At first, everything felt fine. The apartment was quiet, with only the occasional creak of the floorboards or a distant tapping of pipes. It was the kind of quiet you'd expect from an old building, settling into its own rhythm. I thought nothing of it and went about my days, enjoying the peace and calm. But soon, I began to notice something odd. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly, a faint sound, like a whisper, barely audible. I first heard it while sitting in the living room, either reading or watching TV. It was so soft I thought it was just my imagination. I convinced myself it was nothing more than the building settling or the wind outside playing tricks. But the whispers didn't fade. They grew louder, more distinct. Over the next few days, the whispers became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just one voice, it was several, murmuring at once. The voices were too quiet to catch the words, but close enough to send a chill down my spine. The sound seemed to come from deep within the walls, as if hidden in the space between the walls and ceiling, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. It felt like the building itself was alive, breathing, and whispering its secrets to anyone willing to listen. I tried to brush it off, convinced it was just the old pipes or the house settling into its age. But no matter how much I ignored it, the whispers persisted. They seemed to follow me, always there when I tried to relax, like they were just beyond the edge of my awareness, waiting for me to acknowledge them. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to stay awake and listen. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent, and now I could hear them clearly, like they were right there in the room with me. But when I looked around, I saw no one. The sound of murmurs seemed to swirl around me, but the voices remained indecipherable, soft, low, like a conversation held in the dark corners of the room. I stood up and pressed my ear to the wall, hoping to understand. The whispers stopped immediately. Startled, I pulled away from the wall. The silence that followed was deafening, as if the entire apartment held its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then, without warning, the whispers started again, this time louder, more urgent. They seemed to come from every direction, around the walls, the ceiling, the floor. It felt as though the building itself was trying to communicate, speaking in tongues that I couldn't comprehend. The next morning, I contacted the building manager, hoping for an explanation. He came by to inspect, but when he checked, there was nothing. No whispers, no strange sounds, just the usual creaks of an old building. He dismissed it, saying it was likely the old pipes or the house shifting, but I wasn't convinced. That night, I stayed up again, hoping for a peaceful silence. But the whispers returned, louder than ever. This time, I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps pacing across the floor above me. They grew louder, as though someone was walking back and forth, waiting for me to acknowledge them. I couldn't stand it anymore. The next morning, I packed up and left. I couldn't stay in a place where the walls whispered, where something unseen seemed to be watching me. I didn't tell anyone about what had happened, but to this day, I can't shake the feeling that the whispers are still there, waiting for someone else to hear them. I had recently moved into a small, cozy apartment on the top floor of an old building in Pine Lake, a quiet town nestled away from the hustle of the city. The apartment was perfect for me, a single 20-something, trying to start over after a messy breakup. It was just the right size, with enough space for all my things but not too much to feel overwhelming. The building was old, with creaky floors and a worn exterior, but the rent was affordable, and the town felt safe, peaceful. I was eager to settle in and leave my past behind. The apartment had a charm to it. Faded wallpaper, a single window overlooking the fog that rolled in over the lake at night. It was the kind of place you could imagine hearing the occasional creak from the old wood, like the building had its own stories to tell. There was an old desk in the corner of the living room. It was a solid wooden piece, with a few drawers, probably from the early 1900s. It looked like it had been there for decades, but it was functional. At first, I didn't think much of it, just a spot for paperwork and random items. But one day, while I was sorting through the desk, something caught my attention. The bottom drawer, one I had never opened before, was locked. It wasn't unusual for old furniture to have a locked drawer, but this drawer felt different. There was something about it that unsettled me, like there was a secret inside waiting to be found. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than just a locked drawer. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I searched the apartment high and low for a key but found nothing. The drawer remained locked, and my curiosity grew. I tried using a paperclip to pick the lock, but it didn't work. It felt like the drawer was resisting me, like something didn't want me to open it. That night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed a small screwdriver from my toolbox and carefully worked at the lock, hoping not to damage the wood. After what felt like an eternity, I finally heard the soft click of the lock opening. My heart raced, and I pulled the drawer open slowly, almost expecting something to jump out at me. Inside, the drawer was empty, except for an old, yellowed piece of paper. It was folded in half, and when I unfolded it, I saw that it was a letter. The handwriting was neat and precise, flowing like someone had taken their time. But what sent a chill down my spine were the words written on it. "Leave now, before it's too late. The one who lives here cannot be trusted. The apartment is not safe." I stared at the letter, my pulse quickening. Who had written it? Why was it hidden away? And who was the one they were referring to? I had lived in this apartment for weeks, and nothing unusual had happened. Until now. As I sat there, holding the letter, the atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted. It was like the air grew thick, the silence too heavy. I felt it. Someone was watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I quickly shoved the letter back into the drawer, slamming it shut. But the sense of unease lingered. Something about the apartment, something hidden beneath its charming exterior, felt wrong. The locked drawer, the letter. It all felt too calculated, too intentional. I didn't stay much longer after that. The next morning, I packed up my things, the sense of dread crawling up my spine with each passing minute. I moved out that same day, leaving behind the apartment and the unsettling mystery it held. To this day, I wonder about the letter, who wrote it, why it was hidden there, and what secrets the apartment was trying to keep. What do you think happened next? Could there be something more to this apartment, something deeper, waiting for the next person to discover? This was the first time I ever had a paranormal experience. It happened when I was 7 years old at my grandma's house in Silver Springs, a small town in Oregon. Her house was on Oak Street, a quiet, tree-lined road where many of the houses were old, dating back to the early 1900s. Some of the homes were large, old farmhouses, but my grandma's house was much simpler. It was a modest, red brick, two-bedroom cottage, set on a large piece of land surrounded by thick, overgrown trees. The front and backyards were wild with greenery, and although the area has changed a lot over the years, I'll always remember how peaceful it felt there. The house had a long, dim hallway that led from the two front bedrooms to the kitchen and living room. The bathroom and laundry were outside, which wasn't unusual for houses built during that time. My grandma's bedroom had a large fireplace, no central heating back then. It was always cold inside, especially in the winter when the chill seemed to creep in from the trees surrounding the house. In the summer, it was nice and cool, but winter nights were bitterly cold. There was a space heater in the living room to warm the kitchen and the main area, but the bedrooms stayed chilly. My grandma had bad asthma, so my dad often worried about her getting too cold. He would offer to light a small fire in her bedroom fireplace to keep her warm, but she always refused. She was terrified of having an accident with the fire, or worse, of burning the house down. Even when Dad promised to put it out before we left, she wouldn't hear of it. She would always say no, insisting she was fine. One Saturday night, my dad and I stayed for dinner. I was sitting on the floor, watching cartoons. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember, my dad was lifting me up and carrying me to my grandma's room. He laid me down in her bed, left the door open, and turned on the small lamp beside the bed. I woke up alone in her room, disoriented and a little scared. I hated being alone in that house. The long, dim hallway always terrified me, and I never wanted to be the one to walk down it alone. I lay there, unsure whether to call out to my dad or make a dash for the safety of the living room. I sat up, feet touching the cold wooden floor, and that's when I saw something move in the corner of my eye. Standing by the fireplace, there was a strange, transparent figure. It was the figure of a woman, her back turned toward me as she stared sadly into the empty fireplace. She was wearing a nightgown, long in the back, but the front was ragged and torn, as if it had been burned. I froze, paralyzed with fear. Then, I screamed and bolted down the hallway, my heart pounding. My dad met me halfway, and through my terrified sobs, I told him I had seen a lady in a funny nightgown in Grandma's room. He went to check, but the room was empty. Grandma held me close, trying to calm me down. She whispered that there was nothing to be afraid of, and that the lady would never hurt me. My dad thought it was just a bad dream, but I knew what I had seen. I couldn't forget it. From that night on, I never dared to look into Grandma's bedroom whenever we visited. I was scared that the lady would be there again, staring at the fireplace. A few years later, my grandma moved to a smaller apartment. Her house was becoming too much for her to maintain, and it was time to leave. While cleaning out the old house, my dad joked about how they wouldn't have to clean out the fireplace since it had never been used. It reminded me of that night I saw the lady, and I couldn't help but ask my grandma if she remembered. "Oh, I remember," she said softly. "I've seen her many times over the years." Grandma went on to tell me that she believed the woman was a past resident of the house. She thought the woman might have fallen into the fireplace and gotten burned, which explained why her nightgown was ragged at the front. Grandma had never told me this before because she didn't want to make me more frightened. The woman's appearances, Grandma believed, were a warning. She thought the ghost was reminding her not to take any chances with the fireplace. After all, it could have been dangerous. Grandma had taken that warning very seriously, which is why she never used the fireplace, no matter how cold the winters got. My grandma passed away many years ago, but I'll never forget that night. The memory of the lady in the torn nightgown, standing by the fireplace, still lingers in my mind. I had been living in my new apartment for a couple of months, getting used to the neighborhood and the building itself. My apartment was on the top floor of an old brick building tucked away on a quiet street in Silver Springs, a small town just far enough from the hustle of the city. The apartment was cozy and had a homey feel. The rent was affordable, and it seemed perfect for someone like me, just starting over after a difficult breakup. It was just me, the sound of the old radiator clanging, and the silence that came with living alone. But there was one thing that always made me feel uneasy: the paintings. When I moved in, there were 3 paintings already hanging on the walls. One in the living room, one in the hallway, and one in the bedroom. They looked like simple, abstract art. Nothing too spectacular, but for some reason, they didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the colors or the brush strokes. It was something more subtle, something I couldn't quite explain. The first one I noticed was the one in the living room. It was a large, abstract piece full of dark blues and grays, swirls of color bleeding into each other. At first, I thought it was just the style of the painting, but after a few days, something started to bother me. Every time I sat on the couch, I felt as though the eyes in the painting were watching me. It wasn't immediately obvious, but the longer I stared at it, the more I realized that it wasn't just a painting of colors. It was as if the brush strokes themselves formed the shape of a face, one that I couldn't look away from. The feeling wasn't overpowering at first. It was subtle, a nagging sensation at the back of my mind. But every time I glanced up, I felt those eyes following me, moving with me as if the painting had some life of its own. It wasn't my imagination. I knew that now. The eyes were watching me, and it didn't stop. The second painting, the one in the hallway, was smaller. It was painted in deep reds, with jagged, harsh lines slicing across the canvas. At first, I barely even noticed it, but soon I began to feel something strange when I walked by. The angles and lines in the painting, though they didn't form any coherent face, made that eyes appear, eyes that never left me. It wasn't just that the painting was unsettling. It was that the eyes seemed to have purpose. They weren't watching me, they were waiting. But the most disturbing of the three was the one in the bedroom. It was a dark, brooding portrait of a man, painted entirely in shades of black and gray. His eyes were wide, filled with something close to anger, and his expression was stern, unrelenting. I hated looking at it, but I never bothered to take it down. I told myself it was too much trouble, and that it didn't really affect me. But every night when I lay in bed, those eyes, those angry eyes, would haunt me. When the room was dark, they seemed to glow, staring from across the room, as if they knew I was there, helpless. One night, after tossing and turning for hours, I sat up in bed and stared directly at the painting. The cold air in the room felt thicker, almost suffocating. The temperature dropped, and I could hear the wind howling outside. I turned on the light, and the room returned to normal, but the moment I turned it off again, I felt it, those eyes, still watching me, unblinking. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, I took all three paintings down and stuffed them into the back of the closet. Slowly, the feeling of being watched began to fade, but the unease lingered. It was as if a presence had stayed behind, just out of sight, always waiting, always near. To this day, I can't look at a portrait or an abstract painting without feeling that same shiver, wondering if the eyes behind it are still watching, waiting for me to come back. I want to make it clear from the start that I don't do drugs, drink, or smoke. I'm a young wife and mother, and I've never had any history with mental health issues. This all began several years ago, well before I was married. At first, the strange happenings were small, almost too subtle to notice. I'd hear faint whispers in the corners of my room, or catch shadows moving out of the corner of my eye. Then things started disappearing. Little things I was sure I had placed in one spot, only to find them gone, only for them to reappear in the same place days later. One incident that sticks out in my mind is when my driver's license went missing. I always kept it in the zippered pocket of my handbag. One day, I went to grab it and found it wasn't there. I hadn't been anywhere, so I thought it must have fallen somewhere in my room. I searched my entire room, retracing my steps and moving things around. I even asked my mother if she'd seen it. She hadn't. I scoured the house for days, but I never found it. After a while, I gave up and decided to report it as lost and apply for a new one. But the very next day, when I opened my bag again, there it was, right where I'd left it. I had literally turned that bag inside out before, so there was no way I could have missed it. It was sitting there, plainly visible. To make things stranger, I didn't have any siblings, and my mom and I were the only ones in the house. No one else could have been playing tricks on me. Then it escalated. I started waking up in the middle of the night, usually between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., to the sound of dishes crashing, plates, glasses, like they were being thrown across the room near me. When I would get up to check, the kitchen was just a few steps away, but there was never anything out of place. No broken dishes, no signs of anything falling. The sounds would stop after a couple of weeks, but then it got worse. One morning, around 4 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my mother calling me. "Come here," she said clearly, like she was right outside my bedroom door. Now, I always locked my bedroom door before going to sleep, and there was a small gap under the door where I could see light from the hallway if any lights were on. But that night, there were no lights on, and when I heard my mother's voice, I could feel my heart race. I turned toward the door, and there was nothing. I can't describe it, but something felt deeply wrong. The voice was my mother's, but it didn't have the warmth she normally had when speaking. It was almost empty, like it was missing something. I was too afraid to get up, too terrified to answer. I just lay there frozen. The next morning, I asked my mom if she had been downstairs calling me the night before. She was puzzled and told me she hadn't left her room at all. A few weeks later, it happened again. This time, I woke up to a woman's voice, though she didn't even say my name right. It sounded almost like she didn't know who I was. At that point, I was exhausted. Mentally, emotionally, I was drained. The strange events kept piling up, and I began to feel like something was slowly suffocating me. My sleep was plagued with nightmares, vivid and terrifying. I dreamed about dogs and snakes with glowing red eyes chasing me. Silly, right? But the dreams were terrifying. And then, there was the other woman, something I couldn't even describe. It felt like a demon. One night, I was lying in bed, overwhelmed by everything happening to me, when I felt it. A cold, electric sensation on my leg. At first, it was just a weird feeling, but then it followed by a sharp shock, like static electricity, but much stronger. That night, everything took a darker turn. I was lying in bed, defeated, when I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "Just do it." It wasn't outside my head. It felt like it was inside, urging me to hurt myself. It wasn't a voice I recognized, but it felt powerful and demanding. It was that night that I knew I couldn't handle this on my own anymore. I saw a psychologist and a psychiatrist, explaining everything. The voices, the electric shocks, the strange sensations. I had brain scans done, but they came back normal. There was no medical explanation. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong. They said I was fine. It took me over a year before I could sleep with the lights off again. I had just moved into a small apartment on the top floor of an old building, tucked away on a quiet street in the heart of a sleepy little town called Pine Lake. The place was nothing fancy, an older building with creaky wooden floors, high ceilings, and large windows that flooded the rooms with natural light. The rent was affordable, and it felt like the perfect spot to start over, especially after everything I'd been through lately. At first, everything seemed normal. My days were spent unpacking and getting things in order. The peaceful, quiet atmosphere was just what I needed after a long period of change. But as the days went by, there was one thing about the apartment that started to bother me: the TV. The TV had been left behind by the previous tenant. It was a bulky, outdated model, not the type of television I would have picked for myself, but it worked fine. In the beginning, I'd sit in front of it at night, watching a show before bed to unwind. But soon, I started noticing something strange. The TV began to flicker. At first, it was barely noticeable, a quick flash here and there, like the screen was struggling to stay on. But before long, the flickering became more frequent, more intense. The picture would distort, the screen flashing wildly, as though the signal was completely lost. But it wasn't a signal issue. It felt different, like something was interfering with it, something that shouldn't have been there. The first time it happened, I thought it was just an electrical glitch. I unplugged the TV and plugged it back in, but the flickering didn't stop. In fact, it only got worse. The static grew louder and more disturbing, as if the air in the room had thickened with a strange energy. One night, I was watching a movie when it happened again. The screen went black for a few seconds, and then it flickered back to life. But this time, something was wrong. As the picture returned, the static cleared, and that's when I saw it. Something on the screen. A face. It was blurry at first, barely visible, but then it became clearer. The face of an old man. His eyes were deep, hollow, and his twisted smile was unsettling. I froze, unable to tear my eyes away as the face grew sharper, more distinct. Then the screen flickered again, and the face vanished, replaced by nothing but static. My heart raced as I turned the TV off, but the image of that face stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been watching me through that screen. The next night I decided to try watching TV again, thinking maybe it was just a one-time glitch. But the flickering began almost immediately. And once again, the face appeared. This time it was even closer, more defined. The smile was wider, almost like it was mocking me, The screen pulsed with a strange, unnatural energy, and faint whispers, almost like murmurs, drifted through the air. It was as if someone was standing right behind the TV, speaking just out of reach. I couldn't handle it anymore. I yanked the plug from the wall, shoved the TV into the closet, and slammed the door shut, hoping that would put an end to whatever was happening. But the whispers didn't stop. Now they were coming from the walls, from the corners of the room. The sound seemed to be everywhere, always just on the edge of hearing, as though something was lurking nearby, waiting. The next morning, I packed my things and moved out. I hadn't slept a wink. Every corner of the apartment felt like it was watching me, as if something was trapped in the walls, waiting for me to make the mistake of turning on that TV again. To this day, I can't look at an old television set without feeling a sense of unease. Every time I pass one, whether it's in a store or a neighbor's house, I find myself wondering if it might flicker to life and if that face will appear again. The story I'm about to share revolves around a family member and some chilling experiences with seances we tried. I've always been intrigued by the paranormal, but there's one thing I've learned. While I have an intense fascination with the supernatural, I would never want to go through anything like what happened with this particular family member. I would steer clear of anything like it. The family member I'm talking about was my great-aunt, Laura, not her real name. She passed away about 10 years ago when I was just 15. My family comes from Eastern Europe, and we escaped the turmoil of war, eventually settling in a small town in the Midwest after the Cold War changed everything. Growing up, we heard stories from the old country, but nothing compared to the things Laura experienced. When Laura was a young girl, she crossed paths with a woman known as a seer, someone deeply immersed in the old practices of witchcraft. The woman took Laura under her wing and shared her knowledge before she passed away. Despite her years of practicing witchcraft, Laura always maintained her Christian faith. She held on to many of the old superstitions that ran deep in our family's traditions. One time, she managed to upset a shadow spirit, something similar to a poltergeist, and found strange, dirty handprints all over her laundry, even though there were no children in the house. Whenever we visited Laura's house, she would sometimes offer to read our fortunes using playing cards or tea leaves. Playing cards are often linked to tarot readings, so it was likely that she was tapping into that energy. On rare occasions, she would perform seances with a Ouija board, trying to communicate with spirits from the other side. My aunt had a terrifying experience during one of these seances when a spirit, believed to be a murderer from the early 20th century, latched onto her and haunted her for weeks. She would wake up in the middle of the night, feeling as if something was strangling her. Laura's card readings were eerily accurate, often predicting events down to the exact week or day. I remember trying to learn a few of her card layouts, but I never had the skill or patience to do it properly myself, so I never attempted it. She would also cast spells on people, family members included, and leave small tokens behind when she visited, like homemade dolls or odd trinkets. I remember her telling my grandmother that she often heard a voice urging her to do harmful things, especially through her spells. The voice would become more insistent and threatening, until Laura gave in to the temptation. My grandfather, who was always curious, once decided to snoop around in Laura's room. He found strange items hidden under her bed, dolls that seemed to have a life of their own, bottles filled with weird objects, and other unsettling trinkets. Eventually, my grandparents distanced themselves from Laura, not wanting her practices to influence their children. I remember visiting Laura as a child. Despite knowing what she did, I always enjoyed her company. As I grew older, I learned to avoid anything related to witchcraft, but there was always something comforting about her presence. Laura lived a long life, passing away at around 95 after being diagnosed with cancer and given only 2 months to live. Somehow, she outlived that diagnosis and lived beyond what the doctors had predicted. She passed on a Friday afternoon. In our family's faith, deaths are followed by a mourning period, but there was something strange about Laura's passing. It was on a Friday the 13th, according to the old calendar. In our tradition, the soul is believed to wander the earth for 40 days after death, but because her 40th day Mass coincided with a feast day, it couldn't be performed. Was this a coincidence, or was something else at play? After her death, Laura's son sealed up her room and left it untouched for years. But when he remarried, he and his wife decided to clean it out. To their shock, they found strange things under the bed. A crisscross pattern of string tied underneath the mattress. The base of the bed had been raised off the floor, and the string was tied through the springs. Knowing this was likely one of Laura's spells, they contacted a friend who practiced witchcraft. She told them the spell was meant to create tension in the home, and to reverse it, they needed to burn the string and walk away without looking back. After they did, they began to see strange shadows around the house, shadows that seemed to follow them. Believing it was Laura's spirit, they soon moved out. Years later, when I was in my early 20s, my family and I decided to hold a seance using a Ouija board. It was me, my mother, my aunt, and Laura's son. At first, we tried to contact Laura, but nothing happened. We decided to ask if we could speak with any random spirits. To our surprise, we managed to communicate with several family members, my great-grandparents, my grandmother, and even my uncle. It felt so real, almost like they were right there with us. Their responses came in a mix of English and old family phrases, a blend of languages passed down through the generations. After talking with them for a while, we asked why they had all come through. My great-grandfather answered that they were waiting for someone. Curious, we asked if Laura was with them. The answer was a clear and firm no. 3 months after that seance, my grandfather passed away. I like to believe that my grandmother and the others were there with him, guiding him in his final moments. Since then, I participated in several more seances with my family. Each time, we contact our family members, and I've even communicated with my grandfather. It's a comfort to know they're still watching over us. Despite that, we've never been able to contact Laura. Even after all the spells and odd things she did, she was always a pleasant and kind person when we were around her. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I had recently moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in an older building in a quiet neighborhood of Pine Lake. It wasn't anything luxurious, but it was cozy, and the rent was exactly what I could afford after my recent separation. It seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start, an escape from the past, somewhere I could rebuild. The apartment had character. Hardwood floors creaked underfoot, the tall windows let in plenty of light, and the small kitchen quickly became my favorite spot. It was tucked in the back corner of the building, away from the busy street, and offered a kind of peace that I hadn't known in months. It felt like the universe had given me exactly what I needed. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. I spent my time unpacking, arranging furniture, and settling in. But there was one thing about the apartment that I couldn't shake, an odd cold spot in the living room. It sat near the window, in the far corner, and it always felt colder than the rest of the room. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was a draft from the old window or the air conditioning. But even after I cranked up the heat, that one spot remained uncomfortably cold. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was nothing more than a trick of the old building, but the chill only grew more intense over time. What started as a slight draft turned into something more. I could stand in the middle of the room, and it would feel warm, but as soon as I stepped into that corner, the temperature dropped like I was stepping into a freezer. The air around me felt thick, oppressive, as if something, or someone, was standing just out of view. I even rearranged the furniture, thinking maybe it was how the room was laid out, but nothing worked. The cold spot remained fixed in that same corner. It wasn't just the temperature that fell off, it was the energy in the room. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck would stand up whenever I got near that spot. It felt like I was being watched, like something was waiting for me. One evening, after I'd been in the apartment for about a month, I was sitting on the couch, reading, when I noticed the cold spot had become even more pronounced. I stood up to head into the kitchen for a drink, but as I passed the corner, the temperature seemed to drop even further. I felt a sharp shiver run up my spine, and I stood there for a moment, trying to ignore it, but the cold was unbearable. It crept up my legs, into my chest, like it was trying to freeze me from the inside out. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it felt different, closer, like someone was standing right behind me. I froze, my heart racing, and turned around, but there was no one there. The apartment was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The whispering didn't stop. It continued, faint and indistinct, as though it was coming from the cold spot itself. I couldn't understand the words, but I could feel the presence. Something was there, something old and unwelcome. It felt like it had been waiting, like it was calling me, drawing me in. I didn't know what else to do. The fear was too much, and I packed up my things the very next day, leaving behind most of my belongings. I didn't want to be near that cold corner any longer, and I certainly didn't want to see what would happen if I stayed. I never went back, and to this day, I can't shake the feeling that something is still waiting in that corner, waiting for someone else to move in. I wonder, sometimes, if the next person who moves in will feel that same cold, if they'll hear the whispers too, or if it's all just waiting, silently, for someone else to notice. This is a collection of strange events that have haunted my family and me over the years. It all began when I was just a little girl, no older than 8, living in an old, creaky house with my parents, aunt, and uncle in a small town called Pine Lake. The most unsettling part for me was the bedroom I shared with my parents. It was a large room, and my bed was pushed up against the wall. Even at that young age, I remember feeling uneasy at night. Sometimes, when I faced the wall, I would see a strange eye appear on the wall, almost like it had been painted there. But this wasn't just any eye. It had no pupil, just a swirl of bright, rainbow-like colors. The eye would shift in size, sometimes small, sometimes massive. I would close my eyes, hoping it would disappear. Sometimes it did, but other times it stayed. One night I woke up terrified and screamed, "Mom! Mom! There's an eye on the wall." I pointed at it, but my mother just shook her head, unable to see it. After we moved out, I never saw it again. Years later, in my early 20s, I moved into a new house in a quiet suburb with 4 friends. I worked late shifts, so I'd often get home close to midnight. I didn't go straight to bed right away. I'd usually watch TV for a while to unwind. One night, I was up with one of my housemates. He mentioned that sometimes he felt like there was a strange presence in the house, like someone else was there. I admitted I had felt the same way. We decided to stay up a little longer, but suddenly, the TV turned off by itself. We were sitting next to a window, and out of nowhere, a bright white light swooshed past us at head height. It came from behind us and moved in front before zipping straight out the window. The light was so intense, it made our hair stand on end, and the blinds swayed, as if stirred by a sudden breeze. We moved out shortly after that night. Then, about a year and a half ago, my family and I moved into an old, 2-story house in a historic neighborhood near the outskirts of Silver Springs, Colorado. It was a large place, 2 semi-detached homes that had been converted into one. The first time we looked at it, everything seemed perfect, plenty of space, bright and airy. But the moment we got the keys and stepped into the front yard, I felt something was off. I didn't mention it to my partner, but I could tell he was feeling the same way. As soon as we entered the house, it was clear we wouldn't be alone. One night, just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard light footsteps on the carpet. They were coming toward me, and then I felt my blanket being pulled, like someone was trying to sit next to me. I kicked out my leg, and the pulling stopped. That was just the beginning of what was to come. Each morning, the electric kettle would boil on its own, and whenever I was in the kitchen, I'd feel a cold, clammy breeze rush over my back, like someone was standing right behind me. One evening, I was lying in bed, watching TV, when I glanced up at the ceiling. I saw a woman, her ghostly form floating just above it. She had pale, almost translucent skin, long, dark hair, and wore an old-fashioned white nightgown with intricate lace. She waved her arm at me, as if beckoning me closer. I said, "No, I'm not ready," and she vanished. I never saw her again. Soon after, the kids began noticing things too. My stepdaughter told me that objects in her room would be moved around without explanation. My son said he saw a face in my room but didn't mention it until after we moved. He said the face belonged to a man with a beard and a mustache. But the strangest part was that the man's face was green. The man would sometimes pass a cup of water to my son and play games with him. My son said the man was funny, but the room always felt strange, like someone was watching us. I began hearing footsteps running down the hallway, stopping right at my son's door. I started talking to whatever was in the house, asking it to stop disturbing us while we tried to sleep. It worked. In the living room, I'd sometimes hear faint voices, like the sound of glasses clinking. It felt like there was a crowd of people around me. For some reason, I'd always imagined they were from the 1800s. A few days later, my sister called me, telling me about a dream she had. In her dream, she heard the exact same sounds, the voices and glasses clinking, just like I had. I hadn't told her anything about it. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, I heard loud footsteps coming down the hallway toward the bathroom. It was so frightening that I shouted at whoever it was, "Stop! Stop scaring my family. We're leaving soon." I never heard those footsteps again. Another time, around 2:30 a.m. on a hot summer night, my partner and I went for a walk. As we walked down the road, I saw a white figure, an old woman wearing a large brimmed hat and a puffy dress from the 1800s, walking slowly up the street. The moment she saw us, she started moving toward us much faster. We ran back to the house, terrified. Lastly, whenever I drove past the old Silver Springs police station, I'd feel an unsettling pressure on my chest, as if it was hard to breathe. It made me feel incredibly uncomfortable, as if something unseen was pressing down on me. These experiences have made me believe there's something more to this world, something we can't see or explain. What do you think could be lurking out there in the shadows? I worked at a department store for almost 15 years, moving between various locations. Each store had its own strange ghost stories, but it was my first store that gave me a truly creepy experience. I was assigned to the layaway department, similar to layaway in the U.S., where customers store their items and pay over time. I typically worked the afternoon shifts, which meant I was responsible for locking up and turning off the lights. I shared this responsibility with another girl who worked the morning shift. Together, we were the main staff, with casual workers covering weekends. The layaway department was on 2 levels. To reach the second floor, you had to climb 2 flights of stairs. Smaller items were stored on the first level, while larger items were kept upstairs. There was no other way to access the upper level. Each floor had metal racks to hold the parcels. But it was the second floor that always made me uneasy. From the very first day I worked there, I felt a strange tension every time I had to go upstairs. My neck would get that cold, prickly feeling, and I kept noticing dark shadows in my peripheral vision. When I turned to look, there was nothing there. The atmosphere felt off, like I was being watched. If I needed to retrieve or store a parcel, I would rush through it, eager to leave. The thought of turning my back to the dark upstairs was terrifying. One evening, after I'd turned off the lights and was heading down the stairs, I felt a heavy pressure on my shoulder. It felt like someone had grabbed me, their thumb pressing hard into my shoulder blade. I screamed in fright and ran out of the department, not even bothering to lock up that night. As Christmas neared, the layaway department got busier. The 2 other girls and I worked all day every day. One afternoon, the other 2 were at the front counter, and I stayed in the back wrapping and sorting parcels. I tried to avoid going upstairs as much as possible, but soon I had a large pile of heavy parcels that needed to be taken up. I carried them in batches, leaving them at the top of the stairs to be stored later. On my 3rd trip upstairs, I stopped in my tracks. The pile of parcels I had left against the wall was now neatly arranged in a straight line down one of the aisles. I tried to convince myself it was just an accident, but the way they were perfectly aligned made my skin crawl. I grabbed one of the girls to come see, and at first, she thought I was joking, but when she saw how serious I was, she realized something was wrong. We were the only 3 people in the store at the time, and none of us had gone upstairs. We ended up putting the parcels away together because none of us wanted to be alone up there. A few weeks later, it was a particularly busy evening, and all of us were at the front serving customers. It was impossible to avoid going upstairs alone if we needed a large parcel. I reluctantly went up to grab one, trying to shake off my nerves. As I walked toward the back of the floor, something caught my eye. I saw a little girl, blonde hair tied in a ponytail, standing in the aisle. She vanished around the corner before I could react. My heart pounded, and I grabbed the customer's parcels, rushing back down in a panic. The next Monday, a casual worker came in and shared something unsettling. He told us that over the weekend, he'd found the same parcel opened 3 times with the contents, children's toys, scattered across the floor. The first time, he thought the tape had come undone, so he rewrapped it. The second time, he used extra tape and placed the parcel on a bottom shelf, hoping it wouldn't fall again. But when he found it open for the third time, he swore he saw the same little blonde girl peeking around the corner before disappearing. I hadn't told anyone about my encounter with her. Shortly after Christmas, I transferred to a new position within the store, relieved that I no longer had to go upstairs at the end of the day to turn off the lights. That was one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences I've ever had. I'm just thankful I didn't have to deal with it for much longer. When I first moved into the old townhouse, everything felt perfectly normal. It was an affordable place in a quiet neighborhood, nestled among other century-old homes that had stories written into their walls. The townhouse sat on the second floor, with large windows that let in a flood of sunlight during the day and a small balcony overlooking a peaceful, tree-lined street. The building had charm, creaky floorboards, high ceilings, and a sense of history that lingered in every room. But there was one thing that stood out to me from the very beginning: a locked door at the end of the narrow hallway. It was made of heavy, old wood, with a tarnished brass handle that had long since lost its shine. It didn't open, and there was no key. My landlord, a woman named Linda, told me it was simply a storage closet that was off limits to tenants. At the time, I didn't think much of it. After all, every old building has its quirks, and I assumed it was just an unused space. Over time, though, that door started to bother me. It wasn't the door itself that unnerved me, but the way the building seemed to change whenever I passed it. There was something about that section of the hallway that made the air feel heavier, colder, unlike the warmth of the rest of the apartment. Every time I walked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was on the other side, waiting. One evening, after a long day at work, I returned to the townhouse and made my way up the stairs. As I approached the hallway, I froze. The door, which had always been tightly shut, was now slightly ajar. My heart raced. I hadn't touched it, and I was sure it hadn't opened on its own. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the gap in the door. Something deep inside urged me to leave it alone, but my curiosity got the best of me. I slowly pushed the door open. The room inside was completely empty, save for a few dusty, old pieces of furniture tucked away in the corners. But on the far wall, something strange caught my eye: a full-length mirror. It seemed out of place in a room that was supposed to be for storage. I stepped closer, my reflection clear and crisp in the glass. But as I got even closer, something froze me in my tracks. In the reflection, I saw it, a figure standing right behind me. A shadowy, featureless shape, taller than me, with dark, hollow eyes that seemed to reach into my very soul. My body went rigid. I spun around in an instant, but there was no one there. The air grew thick, and my pulse thundered in my ears as I stepped back, my hand trembling as it gripped the doorframe. I slammed the door shut, my heart racing with the wild sensation that something unseen was watching me, lingering just beyond my line of sight. I couldn't bring myself to go near that door again, not that night or any other night after that. But the feeling didn't fade. That room, behind the locked door, felt alive, as though something was trapped inside, waiting for the right moment to step out. A few days later, I casually mentioned it to Linda, but she brushed it off with a laugh. "That old mirror," she said. "It's been there for years. Nothing to worry about. Just leave it alone." But her voice lacked conviction, and there was something in her eyes that unsettled me even more. I didn't bring it up again, but I couldn't escape the unease that lingered. Every time I walked past that door, I felt it, like unseen eyes following me, the space beyond the door still watching, still waiting. I moved out a few months later, but I can't stop wondering about that room, the locked door, the mirror, and the figure that was never there when I turned around. It happened during one of those road trips my family loves to take. We've been on the road for about 8 days, stopping at different towns along the way, and now we were headed to our last stop. My family isn't the type to stay in one place for too long. We prefer to keep moving, so we usually spend a couple of nights in each place. This time, we just left a small town called Pine Ridge, and we were on our way to a place called Oak Valley, a good 7 or 8 hours south of our home in Kansas. We booked a quaint little cabin for the night, and when we arrived, the first thing that caught our eye was the large breakfast hall with big glass windows. You could see straight in, and the tables were all set for the next morning. Outside, there was a well-kept lawn with bird baths and feeders that drew flocks of colorful parrots. We pulled up to the cabin, and I stayed in the car with my little brother and sister while my parents went in to get the room keys. I was only 7 years old at the time, but that experience has stayed with me. My sister and I are known in the family as being sensitive, although it's not like we have actual psychic powers. We just seem to pick up on things that others don't notice. Sometimes I have dreams about little things that later come true, like random conversations or small events. It used to scare me because the dreams always felt so real, but my family didn't believe it at first, except for my sister. I've met others who've had similar experiences, though, and I'm not sure what to make of it. It's strange, but sometimes I wonder if it could be more useful. Anyway, we waited in the car until my parents came back with the keys. We drove around to the back of the hall and up to a row of little cabins. Ours was number 12, the very last one at the end. We got out, grabbed our bags, and walked up to the front door. My dad unlocked it, and as he, my mom, and my brother went inside, I stopped at the threshold. I didn't want to go in. There was a bad vibe in the air, like something was off. My sister seemed to feel it too, because she stayed with me. The house was freezing cold, much colder than outside, and it felt wrong. I didn't want to say anything because I knew my parents would brush it off, but my sister's face said it all. She was uneasy too. She wasn't saying anything, but I could tell. My parents were getting annoyed by the door being left open, so we went inside. The moment I stepped into the cabin, I knew we shouldn't be there. It just didn't feel right. My sister spoke up, saying, "Mom, I don't like it here. We should find a different cabin." I couldn't believe she said that. She was 16, and I thought maybe it was just me feeling weird. I agreed and said, "Yeah, it feels off." But my parents just sighed and told us to stop worrying and pick a room. We walked through the cabin, and the uneasy feeling never left. I found a room on the opposite side of the house, which my brother had already claimed. I asked if I could sleep there with him, and he agreed. The bunk bed made me feel a little safer. My sister seemed upset, so I offered to go with her to find another room. By the time we finished, the only room left was the one at the end of the hallway. It was the worst one. I could feel it. I didn't want to go near it. My sister asked me to help her unpack, but I refused. I ran back to my room, feeling terrified. Oh, my sister put on a brave face, but I could tell she was scared too. Her room felt wrong. There was an old crib in the corner, and the window looked out over a cold, empty pond. As night fell, we ordered some food and tried to distract ourselves with the TV, but neither of us could shake the feeling of unease. Eventually, we went to bed. My brother fell asleep quickly, but I couldn't. I just lay there, scared out of my mind. Something was wrong with Elle. I could feel it. I wanted to check on her, but I was too terrified to move. I kept telling myself that she would be fine, but that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. The next morning, I woke up early, and now that it was light out, I felt a little better about getting up to check on her. As I walked down the hall toward her room, I thought I heard her voice coming from my parents' room. I was confused, so I turned around and knocked on their door. When it opened, there was Elle, sitting on the bed with Mom, and Dad was giving me a hug. I asked her, "Why are you in Mom and Dad's room?" She looked pale, her face drained of color. "I got so scared," she said. "There was something in my room." Her voice trailed off, and she didn't say anything more when our parents looked at her. Later that morning, Elle started to feel really sick. She had stomach pain and nausea. It seemed like just a coincidence, but it was enough to cut our trip short, and we headed back home early. Even now, Elle won't talk about what happened that night. She knows I believe her, but I don't think she believes herself. We're very close, but whatever happened that night scared her so much that I can't help wondering if I could have helped her if I'd been brave enough to check on her sooner. Needless to say, Elle and I will never stay in that cabin again. This was the first strange experience I can remember. It happened when we were living in a small house in a quiet town in Ohio. My parents had rented the house, which was old, dating back to the early 1900s. It had that eerie, creaky charm, and I'd heard that some homes in that area were built on land with a long history, filled with local legends. Our house had a cozy living room, my parents' bedroom, and a dining room, which my two sisters and I turned into our own makeshift bedroom. Beside our room, there was a narrow, rundown room that served as a tiny kitchen. There was an old metal sink in the corner, and a small shower tucked in the back. The toilet was outside, a bit of a walk in the cold night air. I remember having a lot of nightmares in that house, nightmares that didn't feel like dreams at all. One night I woke up and felt the bed slowly split in two. I felt myself slipping down between the sheets, but it wasn't a jolt, just a slow, eerie slide. I wasn't sure where I ended up, but it felt like I was falling into some space beneath the bed. There was no loud thump, just this soft, unsettling sensation. When I tried to move, I felt trapped, like invisible hands were pushing against me, keeping me from moving. No matter where I reached, above my head, to the sides, or in front of me, there was resistance. I couldn't escape. I was trapped in this invisible box. I shared the bed with my older sister, and I tried to call out for help, but she never woke up. It was as if she couldn't hear me, couldn't feel anything. I couldn't understand why it was happening only to me and not to her. There was a small window between our room and my parents' room, and I always slept next to that wall, hoping it would make me feel closer to them. When I slipped through the bed, I'd scream, and my parents would turn on the light and rush into our room. But no matter how much I screamed, as soon as their light hit that window, I would suddenly find myself back in bed, like nothing had happened. The first time it happened, I was so frightened I wet myself. My parents thought it was just because I had needed to use the bathroom in my sleep, which was a mortifying thought for me. They cleaned me up, and we all went back to bed. The next night, it happened again. I felt myself slide down through the middle of the bed, and this time, I thought to myself, I'm dreaming. I need to wake up. And to my surprise, I was able to wake up and get back into bed. But the night after that, when it happened again, I couldn't wake up. I was trapped once more, frozen in place. I screamed for my parents, and when they came in and switched on the light, I was back in bed again. They thought it was just a nightmare, a bad dream, because when they checked, I was always in bed. But I was certain I was awake. I was aware of everything. I eventually got used to it. I stopped screaming. Instead, I would just quietly call out, knowing that when they turned on the light, I'd be pulled back into bed. But one night after calling out, the light came on, and yet I didn't feel myself return to the bed. I was still trapped, and when my parents rushed in, they couldn't find me anywhere. They called out in a panic, and I said I thought I was under the bed, though I wasn't sure. They looked under the bed, and when they knelt down, the feeling of being trapped just vanished. They helped me crawl out, and I felt like I could breathe again. The bed we slept in was an old, second-hand brass bed, much higher off the floor than most beds today. My sister was asked if she had ever felt me crawl over her or heard me getting out of bed at night, but she never heard a thing. she never saw me move at all. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I must have been between 4 and 6 years old. I was too young to understand the idea of ghosts or spirits, and my parents never told us ghost stories. We didn't have a TV, so I never watched any scary movies. I don't believe I was just having nightmares or sleepwalking, because I was so aware of everything. It felt too real to just be a dream. When I first rented the apartment, it seemed like the perfect fit for me. Quiet, spacious, and just far enough from the city to offer some peace and solitude. It was a cozy space with high ceilings and large windows that bathed the rooms in natural light. The rent was affordable, and I loved the idea of living alone for the first time in a place that truly felt like my own. The apartment did have one strange feature, though, a full-length mirror that hung in the hallway right across from my bedroom door. It was an old mirror, framed in dark wood with intricate carvings that made it look like something you'd find in an antique shop. When I first saw it, I didn't give it much thought. It was just another fixture in the apartment, and at least it made the hallway feel a bit bigger. At first, everything was normal. I passed by the mirror when I'd go from my room to the bathroom, and sometimes I'd glance at my reflection. It was always just me, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, a few weeks after I moved in, I started to notice something strange. One evening, after a long day at work, I returned home and immediately noticed it. As I walked into the hallway, I saw that the mirror was slightly off-center. It had been perfectly straight when I left that morning. It was a small shift, but enough for me to notice. I figured maybe the wind had moved it, or something else had shifted in the house. I didn't think much of it, but from that point on, it became hard to ignore. The mirror started moving on its own, just a little, but enough to catch my attention. Sometimes, I'd find it crooked when I hadn't even been near it. Other times, it would be angled at a different direction, as if someone had been adjusting it when I wasn't looking. One night, after another tiring day, I was walking down the hallway to go to bed when I stopped to glance at the mirror. I had gotten so used to its strange shifting that it didn't bother me as much anymore. But this time, something felt different. As I stared at my reflection, I noticed it wasn't quite right. My reflection seemed to lag a second behind me. When I turned my head, my reflection didn't immediately follow. It stayed frozen for a moment before mimicking my movement. Confused, I took a step back. I turned my head again, and this time my reflection did the same, but it didn't stop. It kept turning, slowly, almost as if it was following its own path. The reflection of my face twisted into a faint, unnatural smile, one I definitely hadn't made. It felt as though the reflection wasn't mine at all, like someone else was standing behind me, controlling it. I froze, unsure of what to do. I took a few steps back, trying not to look at the mirror, but the reflection stayed there, smiling. Then, the smile started to speak. "Why won't you look at me?" My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't mine. It was deeper, hollow, like it was coming from the mirror itself. It wasn't like a reflection anymore. It was as if something was trapped inside the glass, staring at me, waiting. I ran out of the hallway, slamming the door behind me without looking back. That night, I barely slept. Even when I woke up, I could still feel the presence of the mirror, like it was waiting for me to return. The next day, I packed up and left. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was behind that mirror was waiting for me to come back. I left everything behind. Clothes, furniture, everything. Except the one thing I knew I could never take with me. That mirror. Hey everyone. I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. In August 2009, I lost my mother to cancer, and since then, she's visited me more times than I can count. Some of these encounters have been so powerful and meaningful that I've shared them before in previous stories. These memories are ones I'll cherish for the rest of my life. As the anniversary of her passing approached in August 2010, I had another experience that was different from the others, and it's one I think you'll find fascinating. It was just a few days before the anniversary, and I had gone to bed after my wife. We were both settled in, the house quiet, as the cool night air gently crept in through the window. Around 10 p.m., I was gently roused from my sleep. I saw what I can only describe as an ethereal light moving through our room. The air felt peaceful, almost like a warm embrace, and even though I couldn't make out any distinct figure, deep down, I knew it was my mother. This wasn't the first time I'd felt such a presence, so I wasn't scared. Through all my past experiences, I'd learned not to fear these moments. Over the next few hours, I woke up at least 9 times. Each time, her presence was near me, as if she were trying to connect with me. At times, I couldn't fully comprehend what was happening, but I didn't resist. I just let it unfold, trusting the experience, which felt deeply right. One moment in particular stood out. I felt her take my hand. My hand had been hanging off the side of the bed, and I could feel her gently lift it, placing it over my chest, just like a mother would for her child. It was such a tender, loving gesture. It filled me with comfort, almost as if she was saying, "I'm still here." Here's where it gets interesting. Throughout this whole time, my wife was also waking up. It wasn't just me who felt something. My wife seemed to sense it too. On at least 4 occasions, she woke up at the same time I did, and every time she would ask, "Did you hear that?" I didn't want to make her more anxious, so I'd reassure her, saying, "No, it's nothing. Just go back to sleep." This happened 3 times with me saying the same thing, trying to keep her calm. But then, on the last occasion, something unusual happened. The soap holder in our bathroom suddenly fell off the sink. It didn't just slip off. It was knocked off, as if something had pushed it. My wife jumped out of bed, wide-eyed, and said, "You must have heard that." I turned to her and said, "Don't worry about it. It's not dangerous." But my wife, now understanding what was going on, looked at me with concern and said, "Stop calling them, Darren. Stop calling them." That's when it hit me. My wife was scared. It became clear that my mother, though she meant no harm, was making my wife uneasy. I knew my mom wouldn't want that, and in that moment, I understood it was time for her to let go. I believe she sensed my wife's fear, and that helped her move on. Afterward, I realized that I hadn't been as open with my wife about these experiences as I should have been. I'd kept so much to myself, thinking I was protecting her from the fear and confusion, but I see now that I should have shared it with her sooner. I was calm, letting these experiences unfold spiritually, but I wasn't transparent with the one person I should have been. In the end, I believe that visit was my mother's way of telling me she was still watching over me. But it also served as a reminder that I need to be more open with the people I love and not hold things back, no matter how strange they may seem. I moved into a small house in a quiet neighborhood just over a year ago. It's the kind of place that feels comfortable, but lately, things have started happening that I can't quite explain. These odd occurrences happen at all times, day or night, and in different parts of the house. I've grown fond of the place, but recently, a couple of unsettling things have made me feel less at ease. One of the first things I noticed were the footsteps. Sometimes, it sounds like someone is walking down the hallway toward the bedrooms, and other times, the footsteps seem to come from the kitchen. The sound varies, sometimes heavy, like an adult walking, and other times light, like a child running around. I've gotten up countless times to check if someone's inside, but every time I look, there's no one there. What's even stranger is that I've heard these footsteps when my 2 cats are with me. Every time, the cats stop whatever they're doing and perk up, staring intently at the open doorways, their eyes following something I can't see. It's unnerving, but at the same time, knowing that the cats hear it too makes me feel less like it's just my imagination. Still, it's enough to make me uneasy. Another strange occurrence happens most nights. There's the sound of a man coughing. It comes from one of the spare bedrooms, usually around 4 a.m. The cough is rough, like someone who's been smoking for years, waking up and trying to clear their throat. It happens several times a week, but then it might stop for weeks, only to start up again. One morning, after hearing the cough yet again, I finally worked up the courage to open the door to the spare bedroom and peek inside. The room was empty, as usual. But the creepiest thing happened just a few weeks ago, one morning as I was getting ready for work. I had just finished my shower, dried off, and started looking for my nail scissors to trim my nails. I searched everywhere in the bathroom, but they were nowhere to be found. I was sure they'd been there earlier. Frustrated, I decided I'd just buy a new pair later, knowing I had to leave for work soon. I locked the door behind me and stepped outside. When I looked down at the porch, near the doormat, something shiny caught my eye in the morning sunlight. I walked over to see what it was, and there, about a meter away from the mat, were my nail scissors. I had no idea how they got there, especially since I'd been looking for them just minutes earlier. It was unnerving to think they had just appeared out there, out of nowhere. Then, about a week ago, I was in my bedroom, getting dressed, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a deep, growling bark. My blood ran cold, and the hair on my arms stood up. It sounded like it came from the kitchen. I mustered up the courage and went to check, but the kitchen was empty, nothing out of the ordinary. A few days later, I was recording a short video of my cats playing, just a 20-second clip on my phone. When I played it back, I heard that same deep, growling bark, right around the 4-second mark. At the time of recording, I hadn't heard the sound at all. The TV wasn't on, no music was playing, just me, my cats, and a quiet house. When I played the video for a friend, she said it was the creepiest thing she'd ever heard. Like I said, I really do love the house and the neighborhood. It's peaceful, and I enjoy the solitude. But the strange occurrences, the disappearing scissors, the barking, have left me feeling unsettled, like something's just not quite right, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever is here is watching. I had just moved into a small, cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Silver Springs. The building was older, with creaky floors and faded wallpaper, but it was well kept, and the rent was affordable. It seemed like the perfect place to start fresh after my recent breakup, a place where I could unwind and focus on rebuilding my life. The apartment itself had a living room with a large window that looked out onto the street. I'd sit there in the evenings, watching the sun dip below the horizon as the glow of the streetlights flickered to life. At first, everything seemed fine. I spent my days unpacking, adjusting to the new space, and trying to find a routine that felt normal. But there was one thing about the apartment that began to unsettle me: the window. It wasn't that it was in a bad location or that it was broken, it was just off somehow. Every evening, when the daylight started to fade and the streetlights began to buzz, I'd notice it. There was a tall, shadowy figure standing outside my window. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The trees lining the street would stretch their long branches across the sidewalk, and in the fading light, their shadows could create odd shapes. But the longer I looked, the more I realized it wasn't a trick of the eye. The figure was tall and solid, almost entirely obscured in the shadow of the trees, standing perfectly still, as though waiting. I couldn't make out any features, but there was no mistaking its presence. Every time I looked out, it was always in the same spot, unmoving, staring in at me. My heart would race when I saw it, but I told myself it was just a person walking by, maybe someone waiting for a friend, or even someone hiding in the shadows. But the feeling of being watched never went away. As the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure wasn't just standing there by coincidence. It felt intentional, as if it was waiting for something, or someone. One night, the curiosity got the best of me. I waited until I saw the figure again, standing there just as it had the previous nights. This time, I decided to get a closer look. Slowly, I crept up to the window, making sure to stay out of sight. I gently pulled back the blinds and peeked through. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was still there, but this time, it was facing directly at me. Its outline was sharp against the fading light, and I could feel its stare cutting through the glass. My heart pounded in my chest, and I quickly pulled away, panic surging through me. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, Maybe someone was standing there by accident. Maybe they were just waiting for someone to come home. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. That figure wasn't just standing there. It was watching me, waiting for me to approach. I couldn't bring myself to look out the window again that night. I stayed huddled in the apartment, every little noise making me jump, wondering if the figure was still out there, still watching me. Every shadow, every creak of the building felt like it could be a sign of something more. The next morning, I decided I needed to clear my head. I went for a long walk through the neighborhood, trying to shake the feeling that had settled deep in my bones. When I returned later that day, I tried to put the strange encounter out of my mind. But when I opened the door to my apartment and stepped inside, something stopped me in my tracks. The figure was standing at the window again, but this time it was closer, much closer, and it wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the apartment, standing right by the window, just staring at me. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was out of the building and far down the street. I never went back to that apartment. It remained empty after I left, and I never spoke to anyone about what I saw. But sometimes, as I walk past an old building or a street light flickers in the distance, I'll catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow, standing motionless, waiting for someone to notice. I had just moved into a small house on the edge of Pine Lake, a quiet town surrounded by dense woods. The house was old, but it had character, creaky wooden floors, crooked windows, and wallpaper that had seen better days. I had spent months searching for the right place, and this one seemed perfect. It was affordable, and the house had a charm that made it feel like home the moment I stepped inside. The first few days went by without issue. I spent most of my time unpacking, arranging furniture, and getting settled. It wasn't until about a week later that I began to notice something unusual. At night, when the house was quiet and I was getting ready for bed, I would hear faint footsteps. They weren't loud, but they were there, soft, deliberate steps, like someone was walking just behind me. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just the house settling, the old wood creaking in the night. But then, the sound started happening more often. Sometimes it sounded like someone was walking across the living room or down the narrow hallway. Other times, I could hear shallow breathing, just out of reach, like someone was standing right next to me. I told myself it was nothing to worry about. Maybe the wind had blown through a crack in the house, or maybe it was just another odd sound that came with an old home. But the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. One evening, after a long day of work, I came home to find the lamp in the living room on. I was certain I had turned it off before I left. It wasn't a huge thing, just the lamp on the table beside the couch, but it unsettled me. I turned it off, thinking I must have forgotten earlier. But when I went to the kitchen to start dinner, I saw it again. The lamp was on, and this time, the closet door in the living room was open, something I knew I hadn't done. I couldn't explain it. The house was small, and there was no way someone could have gotten in without me noticing. Yet there it was, an open door, and the light softly glowing in the dim room. I locked the door and turned the light off again, but the unease didn't leave. Over the next few days, the same strange things kept happening. The lamp would be on when I came home, or doors I knew I had closed would be open again. Sometimes I would hear soft whispers, like muffled voices, but the words were always unclear. It felt like something, or someone, was in the house with me, but I was always alone. One evening, I decided to stay up late to try and catch whatever was causing the disturbances. I sat quietly in the living room, the only sound the steady tick of the clock on the wall. Hours passed in silence, and I started to wonder if I had been imagining it all. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Then I heard it again, the footsteps, slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing around the room just out of sight. I stood up and walked into the hallway, trying to track the source, but when I reached the doorway, everything went still. I stepped into the hallway and froze. The closet door in the living room was wide open again. I couldn't breathe. My heart started to race as I slowly approached the door. The air felt thick, like I was wading through water. I reached out, and just before I could touch the door, I heard the unmistakable sound of breathing, soft and steady, right behind me. I whipped around, but there was no one there. The house was silent. The air felt suffocating, as though something was watching me from the shadows. I couldn't stay another night. I packed my things and left the very next morning. I never went back, and I never told anyone about what had happened. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear the soft footsteps and whispering, like something is waiting for me to return, to open that door once again. I had just moved into a new house on the outskirts of Pine Lake, a small town that felt stuck in time. The house was an old, two-story Victorian, with peeling white paint and a faded porch swing that creaked in the wind. It had been vacant for years, and when I saw the listing, the price was surprisingly low. It was too good to pass up, especially with how tight money was for me. The place had charm, squeaky floorboards, an overgrown garden that seemed to spill out of control, and a staircase that twisted up to the bedrooms. It was just what I needed to start fresh. The first few days in the house were uneventful. I spent most of my time unpacking, sorting through boxes, and slowly making it feel like home. The house had its quirks, sure, but nothing that seemed out of place for an old home. The one thing that did catch my attention, though, was an old photograph in the living room. It was framed in a tarnished silver frame and tucked away on a dusty shelf in the corner. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as the days went on, I found my gaze drifting toward it more often. The photo was of a man, probably taken around the early 1900s. He wore a dark suit and a bowler hat, the kind of attire you'd expect from that time. His face was stern, and his eyes, there was something strange about his eyes. They seemed to follow me no matter where I moved in the room. I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me, but the feeling stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind. One evening, after a long day of unpacking, I sat down on the couch to relax, my eyes once again drawn to the photograph. This time, when I looked at it, something felt different. The man's gaze wasn't just following me. It was like he was staring directly at me. I felt an ice-cold chill run down my spine, and I quickly looked away, trying to shake the unsettling feeling. The next day, I decided to move the photograph. I didn't want to keep it around if it made me uneasy, so I picked it up and planned to store it away in another room. But when I turned the frame over, I froze. The back of the photo was completely blank. No writing, no marks, nothing at all. I had expected to find something. A name, a date, but there was nothing. It was like the man in the photo didn't even exist. I shook it off and stuffed the photo into a drawer, hoping that would be the end of it. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard the faint creak of floorboards, like someone was walking slowly through the hallway. The sound was soft, but unmistakable, like someone pacing back and forth just outside my door. I tried to ignore it, but the next night it happened again. This time, the creaking footsteps were louder, closer, as though someone was standing just outside my bedroom door. I got up, my heart pounding, but when I opened the door, there was no one there. The house was silent again, like nothing had happened, but I knew what I had heard. It felt real. The following day, I found the photograph back on the shelf in the living room, exactly where it had been before. I was sure I had put it away, but there it was, staring at me. And this time, something had changed. The man's expression was no longer stern. It was wide, unsettling, like he was grinning at me, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It felt mocking, like he knew something I didn't. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the photo, my hands trembling, and ran outside. Without looking back, I tossed it into the trash and walked away, my heart racing in my chest. For the first time since I moved in, the house was silent. I slept soundly that night, a sense of peace settling over me. But every now and then, when I pass by old houses or see dusty frames in antique shops, I catch a glimpse of a face, a man with eyes that follow me wherever I go, and I can't help but wonder if it was really just a photo, or if someone, was watching me all along. I want to share a story about my first place after moving into a university house about a year ago. The house was located on a quiet street in a rough part of town, not far from the local college. The house itself was old, rundown, and had an eerie, unsettling vibe. The front yard was overgrown, and the white picket fence was barely standing. When you walked in, you entered a narrow hallway with several rooms on either side. At the very end was the kitchen, with a laundry room and bathroom across from it. Down another small hallway off to the side were 2 more bedrooms. That was the layout, simple but kind of strange. I moved in with my best friend Emily, who I'll call Em, and later, her cousin Dan, who was highly sensitive to paranormal stuff, joined us. Over time, a few more friends moved in, GK, Duke, and my boyfriend, Ahmed. We also had some other random students living there, so the house was always full of people. At first, nothing out of the ordinary happened. It was just your typical house share experience. But one night, around 2 a.m., everything started to change. Em woke up feeling sick and needed to use the bathroom. Our rooms were right across from each other, near the kitchen, so she knocked on my door, looking visibly scared. She told me she had seen a dark shadow in the hallway when she tried to head to the bathroom. At first, I wasn't sure what to think, but I agreed to get up, and we both went into the kitchen to check it out. As we peered down the hallway, we heard the sound of keys clinking on the floor. When we turned around, we saw a dark figure dart quickly across the hallway. Neither of us knew what to make of it, but we didn't want to jump to conclusions, so we decided to go back to bed. The next night, we were hanging out in the front yard, having drinks when 2 guys we didn't recognize walked right into our yard. The area was a little rough around the edges, so we figured we'd send them on their way. But they said they were friends of Duke, who we later learned didn't know them at all. One of the guys came inside while the other stayed outside. He mentioned knowing the guy who lived in the house before it became a share house. He told us that the previous owner had died of a heart attack in one of the rooms, and that he and his wife had always said the house was haunted. After hearing this, things started to feel even stranger. Dan, who was sensitive to paranormal stuff, kept talking about how bad the energy felt in the house. One morning, I woke up and noticed a strange white glow above my bed. There was no light source, but I didn't feel scared, so I just rolled over and went back to sleep. But these glowing lights, black shadows, and strange noises became a regular occurrence. After a while, Em and I just shrugged it off as part of living there, but then it started to get more intense. One afternoon, Em and I were in the kitchen, chatting, when she suddenly closed the door between the kitchen and the hallway leading to our rooms. I asked her why she closed it, and she said she wasn't sure. It just felt like something she had to do. A little while later, we heard loud footsteps coming from the hallway. The footsteps were so distinct and heavy that we both froze. It sounded like someone was walking right toward the kitchen. Thankfully, Em had locked the door. We grabbed whatever we could find as weapons and quietly crept toward the door. Em called the other housemates who were at school, and we decided to head toward the front door. As we made our way down the hallway, Em stopped in front of one of the rooms. She said she saw the shadow again. We looked inside, and that's when I heard a door handle turning. I turned around and saw the door to another room moving on its own, even though no one was home. We panicked and ran to the bathroom, locking ourselves inside. While we huddled in the bathroom, we heard more footsteps and other strange noises from outside. Em quickly called the police, and they arrived a short while later. They searched the house, but they didn't find anyone. There was no way anyone could have gotten into the hallway without us hearing. The police left as confused as we were. This wasn't the first time something like this happened. Over the next few weeks, the strange occurrences continued. We heard footsteps when no one was around and saw dark shadows moving in the house. We started to wonder if the house was built on land with a dark past, especially after hearing about the previous owner's sudden death. And when we later found news reports confirming the heart attack story, things started to make more sense, though nothing about the house felt right. We had all grown used to the strange happenings, but as time went on, it seemed like the house was just never going to let us go. When my grandparents bought the house in Silver Springs, a small town in Oregon, it already had a dark reputation. Locals whispered that it was haunted, mostly because it had been abandoned for years. The house had seen its share of tragedy, including a suicide that left its mark. Now the land is being developed, and the house was bought and moved. If you're curious, you could find it on Google Maps, at the corner of Elm Street and Willow Lane, Silver Springs, Oregon. The house was very different when I was a kid. It had 2 stories, but the layout was odd. There were no internal stairs, and downstairs was mostly used for storage, with a small den where my grandfather would watch sports and keep his beer fridge. The wraparound porch on the right side of the house was later closed in to create more living space. The front steps ran along the side, with a landing at the back. But there was always one room in the house that felt different, strange even. We called it the dark room. It was right in the middle of the house, with French doors that opened to the front porch. There were no windows, and it was always dark, a place where the air seemed heavier than anywhere else. It wasn't that it was outright scary, but there was a sadness there, like the kind you feel when looking at a photo of someone you've lost. It pulled at you. At first, you didn't want to leave, but over time, you couldn't stay. It was as though the room itself carried the weight of old memories, of grief that hadn't quite passed. Throughout the years, strange things happened in that house. People would joke about what they'd seen or heard, but no one could ever shake the feeling that something was wrong. My grandmother, deeply religious, never dismissed it. When we asked her how she could live in the house, she never responded with, "There's no such thing as ghosts." Instead, she'd quietly say, "There's nothing here that can hurt me. They've moved on." But I could tell there was more to it, things she wasn't ready to share. One day, my grandmother was sitting on the porch when she saw a girl she recognized from down the road, named Anita. She called out to her, but the girl ran off, and my grandmother, confused, followed her through the house. When she reached the back door, it was locked from the inside. She checked the whole house, every door bolted shut, and with the house being raised off the ground, there was no other way in or out. The girl had vanished. When my mom was 16, she woke up one night to find a figure standing at the edge of her bed in the dark room. The figure was floating, not walking, and wore a long nightgown with hair that flowed around her face. At first, my mom thought it was my grandmother, but the face kept shifting, twisting, as if it wasn't quite real. It shimmered. To this day, my mom swears by what she saw, even though people laugh at her when she tells the story. I had my own experience when I was about 11. I was sitting outside the French doors, getting ready to practice my violin. The doors were always open, and there was a chair in the space. As I sat there, I saw a pair of small female-looking feet, and the bottom of a long dress drift past. I thought it was my cousin, so I called her name. When I went inside, no one was there. I asked my grandmother if my cousin had come in, but she said no. I looked outside and saw all the kids playing at the far end of the yard, but no one was wearing a long dress. I was confused, but what really struck me was my uncle's story. He had once seen a pair of legs, cut off at the knees, running along the veranda. We used to laugh at him, but after what I saw, the laughter didn't come so easily. Other things happened too, things you couldn't explain. Sometimes, someone would take a glass from the cupboard and set it on the table, but before they could fill it, it would shatter into tiny pieces, even with several people in the room. We heard footsteps when no one was there, and the sound of sobbing would echo through the halls. Sometimes it felt like someone was watching you, even when you were alone. One of the most frustrating things was when you'd leave something in a place and come back to find it gone. You'd search the house, and then, when you returned to where you left it, it would be sitting exactly where it was supposed to be, as if it had moved on its own. I've only felt that strange, sad feeling once more, and that was in a hotel bathroom in a quiet town in the middle of a storm. It wasn't exactly the same, but it was close. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt that unmistakable sensation of being watched, just like I had in that old house. I wonder if the people who own the house now have experienced anything strange. My mother went inside after it was moved, and she says I wouldn't even recognize it now because the layout is completely different. But I don't know if that would change anything. Even with all the weirdness, We all have fond memories of that old house, and I miss it more than I can say. It was around 1:30 a.m. when the strange events happened, and that night still feels vivid in my memory, even though it was years ago. The place was Pine Ridge, an old nature reserve tucked away in the hills, near a small town not far from where I grew up. My uncle had told me stories about the reserve, and though I didn't know much about its history, there was always something eerie about it. The people with me that night were my cousin, Mike, his girlfriend, Amanda, my then fiancée, Jessica, and myself. Mike and Amanda had come to pick Jessica and me up for a drive, and we all decided to head out into the hills for some fun. Mike had a personal challenge for the night: how fast he could drive through the winding roads of the mountains. It's always harder with 4 people in the car instead of just one, but we were up for the ride. We made our way to Pine Ridge, parking just outside the trail entrance, in a secluded spot where we could stretch our legs and chat. The girls stayed in the car while Mike and I got out to walk around. We were standing about 5 feet from the car when we began hearing something strange, the sound of twigs and leaves crunching beneath something heavy. We thought maybe it was an animal, but as we listened, we heard it again and again. It wasn't just random noise. It was the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, walking, though we couldn't see anything through the dense trees. Mike and I exchanged a nervous glance, but we kept brushing it off as nothing, until we started to see movement in the trees, a shadowy figure shifting from one tree to the next, slowly getting closer. That's when Mike said, "Look at that," his voice suddenly shaky, betraying his nerves. I turned to look and froze. There, standing about 20 feet away from us, was a tall figure, around 7 or 8 feet tall. It was cloaked, its tattered robe billowing in the wind. The figure was almost entirely shadow, its features hidden under the hood. The most unsettling thing, though, was that it didn't move like a person. It glided, as if floating just above the ground, yet we could still hear the crunch of its steps on the forest floor. Mike and I didn't need to say anything. Without a word, we both turned and bolted back to the car. As we ran, I could feel the unmistakable sensation that we were being hunted, that something was chasing us, though we never saw it move. We scrambled into the car, and Mike didn't hesitate. He slammed the gas pedal, speeding away to put as much distance between us and whatever we had just seen. "Where'd you guys go?" Amanda asked, her voice confused. We explained that we'd been just a few feet from the car, but when we walked away, they lost sight of us. From their view, they thought we had kept walking, and they even shouted out to us through the window, but we hadn't heard anything, and the window was still up when we returned to the car. As we drove away, trying to shake off the unease, we saw something else that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Off in the distance, we spotted a rundown house frame, with what seemed like hundreds of lit candles placed all around it. The strange part was that it hadn't been there just minutes before, when we had passed by. We didn't stop to investigate, but the sight sent an eerie chill through all of us. Then, as if the night wasn't bizarre enough, a rabbit suddenly ran out in front of the car, darting across the road. It kept running, staying in front of us, even though we were speeding at nearly 50 miles per hour. It was almost as if the rabbit was guiding us. After a few minutes, it veered off the road, but just as it did, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A rope tied into a noose, hanging from a tree directly above the road. That's when we all started to feel that we were being followed, or perhaps stalked. Mike floored the gas again, desperate to put more distance between us and whatever was out there. But the final thing that made us snap was when we saw 2 hitchhikers standing by the side of the road. They were dressed in old-timey clothes, top hats, long coats, the works. The closer we got to them, the more wrong it felt. By the time we passed them, their bodies seemed wrong, limp and lifeless, like they were hanging, and their faces, there were none. Just blank, smooth skin where their faces should have been. We didn't stop, not for a second. We just sped by and tried not to look back. When we finally made it back to the safety of the suburbs, we were all shaken, not knowing how to explain what had just happened. It felt like something out of a nightmare, but it had been real. We didn't talk about it to anyone, because we knew no one would believe us. A few days later, I spoke with my dad. He lived around there for years and knew the area well. When I asked him about the reserve, he told me that animals rarely went near the back of the property after dark. Then he told me something that sent a chill down my spine. Apparently, that stretch of land had been a hot spot for strange rituals and occult practices for decades. I had no idea before, but looking back, it made everything feel even more unnerving. For weeks after that night, we all felt as if something was following us. The sensation of being hunted never left. It was like a shadow we couldn't shake off, one that followed us wherever we went. The weirdness from that night stayed with us, lingering in the back of our minds, never fully leaving. We never went back to Pine Ridge, and we never talked about that night much again. But I'll never forget the way it felt, and I'll always wonder what we really saw out there in the dark. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This story isn't one of my personal experiences, but my cousin's cousin shared it with me, and he said it was fine if I passed it on. So here's what happened to his mom, Sarah, and her boyfriend in a small town in Pennsylvania. Sarah and her boyfriend had just bought a simple, old white house with a picket fence and a weathered roof. Everything seemed normal at first, and they were excited about starting their new life there. But after about 4 months, strange things started to happen. At first, it was nothing too serious, just lights flickering and the occasional sound of something scratching the walls at night. They figured it was just an old house, and they didn't think much of it. But after about 6 months, the strange occurrences began to escalate. Doors would open by themselves, faucets would turn on and off with no explanation, and windows that they had securely shut would be open again the next time they checked. It was unsettling, but they didn't feel like they were in any real danger. They just assumed it was some weird quirk of the house, something that wasn't meant to harm them. Then, one night, Sarah had a dream, or what she thought was a dream. In the dream, she was lying in bed when she heard a loud bang. Suddenly, something started clawing at her legs. She woke up, terrified, but her boyfriend was still snoring beside her, completely unaware. She tried to shake it off as just a nightmare, but as she was about to drift back to sleep, she felt a sharp pain on her left leg. When she pulled back the blanket, she saw 3 deep scratches on her leg. They weren't bleeding, but they seemed to be healing very quickly. In a panic, she grabbed a blanket and went to sleep on the couch for the rest of the night. For about 2 weeks, nothing else happened. The scratches had healed, and life seemed to go back to normal. Until one night, something strange happened again. Sarah and her boyfriend were getting into bed when suddenly, a bottle of sleeping pills, which had been on top of a cupboard across the room, came flying through the air and hit her boyfriend square in the face. Both of them were completely stunned, and they ended up sleeping on the couch that night instead. From that day forward, things began to take a darker turn. Every time Sarah would leave the bedroom and return, her grandmother's old porcelain dolls that had been packed away in a cardboard box under the bed, would be on the floor as though someone had been playing with them. They hadn't touched the dolls, so it was a chilling sign that something was terribly wrong. The final straw for Sarah and her boyfriend came one day when she came home from work. Her boyfriend wasn't home, and everything in the house was turned off. She went to light a cigarette, but as she struck the match, she smelled gas. She hurried to the stove and found that someone, or something, had turned the gas on. That's when they realized they needed help. They were religious, so they decided to call a priest. The priest arrived the next day and did a thorough investigation of the house. After walking around and sensing the energy in the place, he looked visibly shaken and told Sarah, "Yes, I can definitely feel spirits." Sarah, confused, asked, "Spirits?" The priest replied, "Yes, there's more than one. I can sense a happy spirit, probably a young girl. She's the one playing with your grandmother's dolls and turning the taps on. Those are the harmless, childish activities. But there's another presence here, and it's much darker. I can feel it, and it's not good. It seems like it wants to harm you." The priest offered to bless the house immediately, but Sarah and her boyfriend weren't sure. They were both a little skeptical about the idea of a blessing. Instead, They decided to leave the house and stay with Sarah's mother until they could find a new place. After that, they never set foot in the house again. I've heard this story so many times from my relatives, and I've even seen photographs of the house and the dolls Sarah's grandmother used to keep. In several of those photos, there are orbs, and in a few, you can even see figures, sometimes a tall man, and other times a small girl. The figures seem to appear in the photos without any clear reason, making the whole experience even creepier. It was a typical Saturday night when my two friends and I found ourselves at Sarah's house, trying to make the best of a quiet evening while her parents were away. We had all been friends for years, but something about the atmosphere that night felt different. Sarah suggested we do something a little out of the ordinary, a Ouija board session. Now, I've played with Ouija boards before, and it usually turns out to be nothing more than a game where someone's clearly pushing the planchette. But this time, it felt different, something I'll never forget. At first, everything seemed harmless. We had set up in the living room on the old coffee table by the windows. The house itself was large and a bit run down, an old farmhouse on the edge of town, where the nearest neighbor was a good mile away. The air always felt a little colder around the corners, and the place had that deep, creaky quiet only old houses seem to have. We figured that alone made it the perfect setting for something spooky. The three of us sat in a circle, and as we began the ritual, the atmosphere shifted. We could all feel it. The air became thick, almost oppressive, like something was watching us. I don't know if it was nerves or something else, but the shot glass we were using as a planchette moved with a strength I couldn't explain. We weren't touching it, yet it slid across the board with precision. When we asked for a spirit to make contact, the glass moved quickly, spelling out a name, one that stopped us all in our tracks. It was the name of Matt, one of our close friends who had passed away in a car accident the year before. The room grew heavy, like the walls were closing in on us. The realization hit us like a wave. Was this really him? Was he trying to reach out? I asked a question that only Matt and I would know the answer to, hoping it would prove this wasn't some kind of prank. I even took my finger off the glass to show I wasn't moving it, and to my shock, the glass began to move again, answering correctly, just like that. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could see that Sarah and Olivia were equally shaken. The suspense was unbearable. Olivia, always the brave one, urged Matt to give us a sign, anything to show he was here with us. The moment the words left her mouth, we heard it. Footsteps, loud, clear footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway outside. There was no mistaking it. We all froze, eyes wide with terror. The sound of footsteps grew closer, steadily, deliberately. It was like he was walking toward the house. We begged him to stop, but the sound didn't cease. If anything, it grew louder, more urgent. Then, from somewhere in the next room, came a loud, ear-splitting bang. All of us screamed in unison, the terror mounting as we scrambled to the safety of the bed, clinging to each other, too scared to even speak. After what felt like an eternity, the house fell silent again. Olivia, still visibly shaken, slowly got up to put the board away. But when she picked it up, the shot glass fell to the floor, landing upside down, a sign that, according to some, meant the spirit had been released. As soon as it hit the ground, the footsteps returned, now unmistakably louder, coming closer. That was it. We couldn't take it anymore. We ran, not bothering to look back, out the door and into the dark of the night. The streetlights along the road flickered as we dashed for the nearest comfort, my house just a few miles away. The eerie quiet followed us, but there was something else, that familiar sound of a skateboard rolling down a hill. The sound Matt's skateboard made when he used to ride it to school every day. That was how we used to know he was nearby, and it felt as though, just for a moment, he was with us again. We didn't speak a word as we walked the whole way to my house, but we all knew. We had experienced something real, something we couldn't explain. I'll never forget the chill that crept down my spine when I realized I had connected with Matt again, even if only for a brief moment. That night still haunts me, but part of me wonders, was it really him or something else? It was about 2.5 years ago, and I still can't explain the terrifying experience my friends and I went through. It's something that stayed with me since that night. At the time, we had just entered our senior year of high school. It was during the summer break, and one evening, my friends Ethan, Mike, and I decided to go on an adventure. Ethan and Mike had gone hiking through a nearby wooded area the weekend before and claimed it was a peaceful, albeit creepy, experience. Despite the warnings about trespassing, they convinced me to join them that night. The park we chose, Edgewood Forest, is a beautiful place during the day. Tall trees, clear skies, and open trails where families and locals go for walks. But after dark, the atmosphere shifts, turning the place into something eerie. The shadows stretch long across the ground, and the wind whispers through the branches, like something, or someone, lurking in the distance. It was around 2:30 a.m. when we snuck past the park's gate and into the woods. We wandered around familiar spots, the playground from our childhoods, and then made our way deeper into the forest. We were looking for an old, abandoned cabin that Mike had heard about from his older brother. We didn't go too far before we decided to turn back. That's when we heard it, a scream, high-pitched, sharp, and unnaturally loud. At first, we thought it might be an animal, maybe a coyote or something, but it felt too human. We shrugged it off and kept moving, thinking it was nothing. But then it came again, closer this time. It was like something was following us, no longer an animal, and it was getting closer. We ran. We didn't look back until we were out of the woods, and by the time we caught our breath, we were all shaken, but we didn't talk about it much. We just went home. 2 weeks later, we decided to return, with our friend Dylan joining us this time. It was a crisp, clear night, and there was a slight breeze that added to the chill in the air. Let me be clear, we were completely sober. Not a drop of alcohol, and no drugs involved. We snuck in again, this time determined to find the infamous Echo Cavern. It was a spot deep in the woods, known to be hard to reach, hidden behind winding trails, creek crossings, and thick forest. Somehow, after what felt like hours of hiking, we found it. The tunnel itself was narrow, cold, and dark, and as we passed through, we could hear our footsteps echoing, like the walls were alive with sound. We came out the other side into an open path leading up a small hill. A weathered sign pointed the way to the park's north waterfalls, but we were way off course, miles from the nearest trail exit. We kept climbing for a couple of hours, feeling the darkness pressing in on us. The path eventually leveled out, and we rounded a bend, where something stopped us dead in our tracks. Ethan, who had been in the lead, suddenly froze. Mike and I, a few steps behind, looked ahead, expecting to see maybe a park ranger or another hiker. But as we got closer, we realized it wasn't anyone we'd ever seen before. It was a little girl, about 7 or 8, standing motionless in the middle of the path. Her clothes were torn, and her hair was wild, hanging over her face. At first, I thought she might have been lost, but then I saw her face. It was pale, almost sickly looking, with dark, sunken eyes. Her skin was discolored, like it was rotting. And then, in a way that still haunts me to this day, her jaw unhinged, dropping open far beyond anything human, hanging down to her chest. And then she screamed. It was a sound that no human could make, high, shrill, and ear-piercing. It was so loud that it felt like it reverberated in the very air around us. Without thinking, we turned and ran as fast as we could, panic flooding our veins. The scream followed us, echoing through the trees, and we didn't stop running until we were back at the park's edge, gasping for air. Tom, the most logical and skeptical of us all, was shaken the most. He'd been in the front and had seen her clearly. He couldn't put into words what he had seen, just that it wasn't human. Mike and I, who'd always believed in the supernatural, couldn't help but remember the scream from our first trip. It was the same sound. When we made it back to the car, none of us spoke for a long time. It felt like the air had changed, like the night had become a part of us, something we couldn't shake off. We told a few people about it when we got back home. They didn't believe us, of course, but that night still lingers in my mind. I don't know what we saw in those woods, but I know it was real. And to this day, I can't help but wonder if someone, is still out there, waiting in the dark. Over the past few decades, I've experienced more than my fair share of out-of-body experiences, OBs, but only a few have truly left a lasting impact. Today, I want to share one of those profound encounters, hoping to shed light on the experiences and intentions of those who walk among us in spirit, or at least, how I've come to understand it from my own perspective. This particular experience took place several years ago in the home where I've lived for over 20 years. One night, without warning, I found myself outside my body, floating above it, looking down at myself peacefully asleep in bed. My awareness was crystal clear, and I felt a strong sense of separation from my physical form. There was no fear, only a quiet acceptance of the situation. It felt almost like I was floating in a dream, but in a very conscious way. I had an overwhelming urge to find my wife. Looking back, I believe this longing stemmed from the need to be seen, to have my existence validated in the spirit world, something I imagine many spirits feel when they visit their loved ones. I floated through the hallway of our home, passing by our eldest son's room, and headed toward the next bedroom, where my wife and our youngest son were sleeping. As I entered their room, I suddenly felt a strong force pulling me back into my body. It wasn't a decision I made consciously. It just happened. Within moments, I found myself back inside my body, lying in bed. But just as quickly, I was out again, still with the same determined desire to reach my wife. This time, I was even more focused on validating the experience, to prove to myself that what was happening wasn't just a dream or a trick of the mind. I floated down the hallway again, entering their bedroom. I reached out and this time was able to gently touch my wife's foot. But once again, I was swiftly pulled back into my body, only to rise once more. However, something felt different this time. During my first 2 visits to their room, I had noticed that my son was lying with his back to the wall, while my wife was facing the entrance to the room, her face clearly visible in the dim light. But this time, when I entered the room, my wife had turned over, facing the wall, just like my son. I didn't realize it at the time, but my wife had sensed my presence during all 3 visits, and she had become frightened. In an attempt to avoid seeing anything, she kept her eyes tightly shut. That realization came much later and made me wonder, how often do spirits, like myself, visit their loved ones with no intention of causing fear, only to unintentionally frighten them? Could many so-called hauntings actually be misunderstood attempts to connect, rather than malevolent encounters? The next morning, my wife didn't say anything about what had happened the previous night. I began to doubt myself, questioning whether the experience had been real after all. I decided to wait and see if she would bring it up on her own. Later that afternoon, in a casual conversation, I decided to break the silence. I mentioned that I thought someone had been in the house the night before. To my surprise, she responded immediately, "Yes, someone was here. Someone touched my foot." She went on to describe how she had felt someone enter the room several times during the night, and during the last visit, she had turned over in fear, keeping her eyes shut tightly to avoid seeing anything. Her response confirmed what I had experienced and gave me a new perspective on how these encounters might be perceived. While there are certainly spirits with malicious intent, I now believe that many experiences, like mine, are simply misunderstood. My intention wasn't to scare her, but rather to validate my presence and prove to myself that the experience was real. I can't help but wonder how many other spirits visit their loved ones with similar innocent intentions, only to unintentionally cause fear in the process. We were sitting on the couch, watching a kids' show on the TV. After a while, I asked my cousin if she wanted something to drink. She said yes, so I got up and went into the kitchen to make us both something cold. When I returned and sat back down, the kids' show had lost its charm. I was getting bored and told my cousin I wanted to change the channel, but she wasn't having it. So I suggested, "How about we go play outside?" She nodded, and just as we were about to head out the door, I noticed something that made me freeze. Standing behind the glass sliding door was a little boy. He was staring at us, with one hand pressed against the cold glass. He looked no older than 3 or 4 years old. Something deep inside me shifted. An instinct, maybe, because I immediately grabbed my cousin's hand, feeling an overwhelming sense of protectiveness. "Do you see the little boy?" I whispered, my voice shaky. She looked at me, confused, her brow furrowing. "What little boy?" "You're freaking me out," she said. I turned back to the door, but the boy was gone. My stomach dropped. There was no way I'd imagined it. I was certain I'd seen him. Trying to brush it off, I told my cousin to stay inside while I went out to check the backyard. She held onto my hand tightly, clearly frightened, and wouldn't let go. In the end, I took her with me. We searched the backyard, but there was no sign of the boy. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe it had been a ghost. But I tried to convince myself. It was just a little boy, even if he was a spirit. He couldn't hurt us, right? So we went back inside, and I locked the sliding door behind us. That night, I went to bed without much worry, though something still felt off. The next morning, I was up early, sipping coffee and chatting with my mom. Out of nowhere, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. She told me she thought she'd seen a little boy in the lounge room, just for a split second. She said he was standing there, staring at her, before vanishing. I was stunned. I told her what I had seen the day before and led her to the sliding door to show her where it had happened. What I saw next made my skin crawl. Under the door handle, right where the boy had been, was a tiny handprint. It was as if someone had tried to reach the handle but couldn't quite grasp it. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the mark. There was no way it had been there earlier. I was sure of it. A few days later, something even stranger happened. My next-door neighbor mentioned that her young son had an imaginary friend. She said her son talked to this friend all the time. But then, her older son spoke up, claiming that the friend wasn't imaginary. He'd seen the little boy too, watched him play with his younger brother, and then, just like that, the boy disappeared right in front of his eyes. I've never told my neighbors about my experience. Their younger son, the one who talks to this friend, is 4 years old, the same age as the little boy I saw that day. When I was around 7 years old, living in a small house in the quiet town of Pine Lake, I began to notice strange occurrences. I would smell odd, burning scents in the air, even though nothing was on fire. I would hear voices, faint, almost indecipherable, calling my name. It always seemed like the voices were coming from nowhere, as if the very walls themselves were whispering. My cat, Patches, would stare intently at empty corners, her fur standing on end, as if she saw something I couldn't. It always felt like something, or someone, was watching me, though I never knew who or what it was. When I was 10, my family moved to a larger house in a more remote part of Pine Lake near the woods. It was an old, creaky place with a long driveway and heavy fog rolling in at night. That's when I first began to feel the presence of something, or someone, following me. I couldn't shake the feeling that a mischievous little boy was hiding somewhere in the house, always moving my belongings, breathing near my ear, or just silently watching me. It wasn't harmful, but it was unsettling, like a game of hide and seek that I never agreed to play. At school, I never really fit in. I was the quiet kid who kept to myself. To cope with the loneliness, I talked to my old ragged doll, which made other kids think I was strange. They teased me relentlessly, and one day I retreated to the bathroom, singing a sad tune to calm myself as I stared into the mirror. But when I turned back, there was something on the wall behind me. A shadowy, werewolf-like figure, large and hulking, was staring at me. Terrified, I ran out without even glancing back. When I was overseas with my family, I became very ill with a high fever. In the midst of it, I heard a voice calling my name. I awoke, feeling groggy, but strangely comforted. The voice seemed familiar, protective, almost like a family member was watching over me. It didn't frighten me, it felt safe. But as I grew older, the encounters became more intense, less comforting, and far more unsettling. At 13, I had 2 cats, Dusty and Glow, who were inseparable. On my birthday, I called for Dusty to say goodbye before heading off to school, but she never came. When I returned home, I found her lifeless body in the middle of the road, her wide eyes frozen in terror. I never saw Glow again after that. I stopped celebrating my birthday after that day, overwhelmed with grief and confusion. Desperate for closure, I turned to a seance, hoping to reach Dusty. My friend Jess, who claimed to have psychic abilities, helped me set up the seance. We placed a photo of Dusty on the table, lit a candle, and even put out a bowl of cheese, Dusty's favorite treat. As we called her name, the candle flickered violently. Jess screamed, claiming she saw a face staring at her through the flame. When I looked, I saw a cat's skull floating in the air. My heart raced as a strange green light appeared and moved toward me. Panic took over, and I ran to the kitchen, but I caught a glimpse of the figure outside the window before it vanished. That night, everything changed. The spirits seemed to intensify, and strange occurrences followed. Afterward, I began seeing shadow figures moving around my room and hearing disembodied voices whispering in gibberish. The nightmares were relentless. I'd wake up with fresh scratches on my skin or the sensation of being grabbed by invisible hands. Phantom faces and strange creatures would appear in the corner of my vision. The air would grow heavy with a sense of being watched, even when I was completely alone. One night, I tried taking photos of the activity, but the spirits didn't like that. They responded aggressively, with one shrill, ear-piercing scream that left me shaken and in tears. One spirit, whom I called John, was different. His presence felt darker, angry, jealous, and oppressive. He always lingered on the left side of my bed. I could feel his cold breath on my skin, or hear deep growling from the corner. Once when I tried to ignore him, he struck me on the head over and over again. There was also Millie, a mischievous little girl who liked to hum eerie tunes and giggle as she skipped down the hallways. Over time, Millie began haunting my friend Mel, who had witnessed many of these strange happenings with me. One night, Mel and I tried to banish the spirits, reading verses from the Bible in an attempt to rid our home of them. But Mel's younger brother, who was outside, claimed he saw an entire family of spirits, a mother, father, son, daughter, and even a baby, standing in the garage. The spirits never left. They seemed to be tied to me and the house, a presence that refused to fade. More recently, I've noticed strange glowing mists in the air, flickers of color, and phantom cats, including one I call Shadow. Shadow is solid, but the moment you try to focus on it, it vanishes into thin air. Despite all the paranormal activity, I've grown used to it. But John, he still frightens me. His aggressive behavior makes me question whether I'm truly sensitive to the paranormal, or if something deeper is at play. I want to help these spirits move on, but the fear of what they could do next always holds me back. I wonder if there's a way to open my mind without exposing myself to even more danger. This experience took place when I was living at my parents' house in a small town called Maple Ridge, nestled in the foothills of New York. It all began just a few days before my grandma's funeral. She had suffered a severe stroke the week before and never regained consciousness. When I first heard the news about my grandma passing, it hit me hard. I hadn't been able to cope well when she was in the hospital, and I hadn't been the most comforting to my mom either. I tried to keep my emotions at bay, hiding behind a wall of detachment, but when I got the news, I couldn't keep it in anymore. The grief overwhelmed me. With the funeral coming up, sleep had already become elusive, so waking up at 4 a.m. that Monday morning didn't come as a shock. But what happened next would change everything. Lying there in the dark, I became aware of a faint, muffled sound coming from outside my window. It was low, almost inaudible, and I had to strain my ears just to catch it. As I listened, my heart began to race, and I felt a tight knot in my chest. I switched on the bedside lamp, sat up in bed, and tried to make sense of the noise. It wasn't just a sound. It was a voice. What I heard sent chills down my spine. The voice repeated the same phrase over and over. Maggie and Sarah, it's Nana. Maggie and Sarah, it's Nana. Those are the names of my sister and me. Overcome with emotion, I couldn't help but cry, feeling both terrified and deeply sad. Though I instinctively knew it was her, the fear and shock were overpowering. I panicked and whispered, "Stop," hoping it would go away. As soon as I spoke, I heard shuffling footsteps coming from the hallway. Slow, deliberate, like someone was moving toward my door. My chest tightened, and I froze, waiting for whatever was about to happen. Then my cat, who had been sleeping at the foot of my bed, jumped up and scratched urgently at the door. I quickly opened it, and she darted in, jumping onto the bed and curling up beside me. The voice faded, replaced by the soft morning bird song. Exhausted, I fell asleep, my cat nestled against me. When I woke a few hours later, I knew I had to tell my mom what had happened. I went to her room and shared everything. To my surprise, she confessed that she too had woken up at 4 a.m. She hadn't heard a voice, but she described lying in bed, staring into the darkness of her walk-in closet, when she noticed a glowing orb of light floating mid-air. At first, she thought it was just a streetlight filtering through the blinds, but when we checked the window later, we saw the blinds were barely cracked, allowing no light through, certainly not enough to create a perfect glowing orb. A year later, my grandma made her presence known again. One evening, my mom and I were watching TV in the living room when the power suddenly went out. We fumbled around in the dark for candles, but before we could find anything, the lights flickered back on. It was late, so we decided to head to bed. Standing in the hallway, saying goodnight to each other, we suddenly heard a soft, clear voice from the dark corner of the living room. "It's okay, she's all right." We froze. I looked at my mom, and the look on her face told me she had heard it too. Cautiously, she asked me what I had heard, and when I repeated the words, she nodded, visibly shaken. Freaked out, we ran to opposite ends of the house, to our respective bedrooms. The next morning, my sister told us that the night before, at around 11 p.m., the same time the lights had gone out, she and her fiancé had lost control of their car just 5 minutes from our house. They crashed into a telephone pole, causing the blackout. My sister briefly lost consciousness, but a passerby found them just as the car caught fire. Miraculously, neither she nor her fiancé were injured. After that, my experiences with my grandma became more subtle. I dreamt of her occasionally. In some dreams, she sat quietly, her eyes distant. In others, she appeared much younger than I remembered, lying in bed, speaking softly. The last dream I had of her stands out the most. In the dream, I was sitting on a bench at a mall, watching my family walk ahead. My grandma wasn't with them, but walking just behind, as though watching over them. Suddenly, she stopped and turned to face me. She walked over and began to speak, not with words, but directly into my mind. She told me she had to go, that she couldn't stay any longer. Overcome with grief, I cried and begged her not to leave. Tears filled her eyes as she gave me a long, comforting hug. I told her I loved her and missed her, and just like that, she was gone. I woke up sobbing, the emotion still raw. Ever since I was a little girl, I've seen a girl in a long white dress, almost like an old-fashioned nightgown. Her dark brown hair hung down, dripping wet, and her face was covered in deep gashes. She would always hum a tune, one that sounded like the theme song to an old children's show. The first time I told someone about her, I was around 7 years old. I confided in my dad, but he laughed it off, calling me crazy and saying I must have been imagining things. He told me never to speak of it again. Of course, I didn't listen. Instead, I went to my mom. Surprisingly, she didn't dismiss me like my dad did. She said that she, her mother, and my great-grandmother all had the ability to see spirits. It was a gift passed down through the women in our family, but not to the men. I never really understood it at the time, but I never forgot what she said. As the years went on, the girl appeared more and more often. By the time I turned 13, she had become a constant presence. On the morning of my 13th birthday, I woke up with a sharp pain in my ankle. When I looked, I saw what appeared to be small puncture marks all around it. At first, I thought it was just a scratch I had gotten in my sleep, But things only got stranger. The girl started standing at the foot of my bed, humming that haunting tune. Sometimes, I'd wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, feeling as if I had just been pulled out of a lake. I couldn't ignore it anymore, so I told my mom what was happening. She tried to calm me down, telling me, "Never be afraid. Always remember, you're in control." But how could I not be scared? My friends didn't believe me at first, until I showed them the evidence. The wet sheets, the unexplained coughing fits, the strange marks. Eventually, they started sleeping over to witness it themselves, and when they did, they were just as terrified as I was. I eventually gave the girl a nickname, Charlie. My sister and I used to joke about her, but it was never a laughing matter. Charlie followed me everywhere, even to school. She would hide, but I could always feel her presence. Once I pointed her out to my best friends, Savannah, Jared, and Jordan, and they could see her too, a faint, shadowy figure standing just out of sight. One day, in the middle of English class, I was so frightened that I ran out of the room. Savannah followed me, and as we walked through the school, we suddenly found ourselves surrounded by crows. They were loud and menacing, their eyes watching us. And then, standing nearby, I saw her, Charlie, looking angry. We ran back to the classroom, both of us shaken to the core. Every night, I had the same nightmare. I was in a car, driving over a bridge that led into a deep, murky lake. I tried to escape, but a dark figure would grab my ankle, pulling me back into the seat, slamming my head against the window. I would wake up coughing up water, gasping for air. Eventually, I was too terrified to sleep in my own room, so I started sleeping in my mom's room. For some reason, Charlie wouldn't follow me there. It was like someone, was keeping her out. One day, my mom's friend, Gemma, came over to help. She had a book full of stones, 6 of them, each a different color: green, pink, black, blue, purple, and yellow. She asked me to hold each one and tell her which one felt the strongest. When I touched the green stone, I knew it was the one for me. Around the same time, my mom found a necklace that belonged to my great-grandmother, who had recently passed away. She gave it to me, saying she felt it was meant for me. The moment I wore it, I felt a sense of peace, like a protective force was watching over me. That night, I stayed at Gemma's house. As always, Charlie appeared at exactly 2:22 a.m. I woke up and saw her standing at the foot of the bed. I pointed her out to Gemma, but she told me to try and go back to sleep. However, Gemma didn't sleep much that night. Charlie dragged her off the bed several times, furious that someone was interfering with her attachment to me. Months passed, and the hauntings only worsened. Then one night, my mom heard a whisper in her ear. "Tell her to tell Charlie to go into the light, to the farm with the chickens and the ducks." The next morning, my mom told me what she'd heard. That's when I realized Charlie wasn't her real name. Her name was actually Charlie, and she needed help crossing over. Home alone that day, I walked through the house, calling out to Charlie. I told her it was time for her to go, that I couldn't keep living like this. After what felt like an eternity of pleading, I heard her whisper, "Goodbye." It was done. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, and for the first time in years, I could breathe easy. Later, I learned that Charlie's mother had killed her. I still don't know why, and I'll never know the full story, but I'm grateful I could help her find peace. It's now August 23, 2011, and I haven't seen her since. Though the experience was terrifying, it taught me so much about myself and the gift I've inherited. I'll never forget Charlie, but I hope she's finally found the light and the peace she needed. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. It was August 20th, 2011, when my cousin's wedding took place. My family had traveled to Brisbane on August 8th, and then we made our way to Sydney a week later. My cousin and her new husband had arranged for our family, her parents, her brother, a few other relatives, and me to stay in a large rented apartment in a charming part of the city. The place was located in the trendy Woollahra neighborhood, not far from Bondi Beach and the Opera House, where the wedding would be held. It was a perfect spot, just a 2-minute walk to the nearby shopping center, and only about 20 minutes to the beach or the iconic Opera House. The apartment was spacious, almost like something out of a magazine, with its own quirks and unique layout. The ground floor of the building housed a physiotherapy office and a small business. To the left, behind the building, was the garbage and recycling area, while to the right, a staircase led up to the second floor, where 2 large apartments were located. Our apartment was open plan and modern, with all the comforts of home. Upstairs, there was a room with 2 beds, a TV, and an Xbox. This was the room I'd claimed for myself. On the main floor, there were more rooms, one with bunk beds, another with 2 single beds, a laundry closet, and a master bedroom. At the back of the apartment, a large, open space held the kitchen, dining area, and living room, with a sectional sofa where my dad and I later decided to sleep. The night after the wedding, I was exhausted and went to bed early. My back had been bothering me all week, cramping from my period, so I woke up multiple times through the night. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up again, feeling restless, and decided to make some tea to help me settle back into sleep. As I filled the electric kettle and set it to boil, I began hearing a faint jingling sound. At first, I thought it was the kettle itself, but it hadn't even started boiling yet. Then I wondered if it was a phone alarm, but after checking every room in the apartment, including upstairs, I found nothing. Thinking I was just too tired, I returned to the kitchen, made my tea, and sat on the couch to watch a movie on my laptop. That's when things began to get even stranger. The jingling sound grew louder, and then, strangely, I began to hear the rhythmic clatter of horse hooves. The sounds seemed to come from right outside the building. Curious but also a bit uneasy, I went to the dining room window, which overlooked the front of the building and a park next door. Beyond the park, I could make out the shadowy outline of an old church. I looked out, half expecting to see someone walking by, or perhaps a car driving past. Instead, I saw something that left me frozen in place, a black horse-drawn carriage. Everything about it was dark. The horses were black, the carriage itself was black, and even the driver was dressed in black from head to toe. It looked like something out of another time, an old-fashioned Victorian carriage. My heart skipped a beat, and I watched, unable to move, as the driver stopped the carriage in front of the building. After a moment, the driver stepped down and opened the door of the carriage. To my surprise, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment next door stepped out. She was a kind, familiar neighbor we had gotten to know during our stay. A lively woman in her 80s, she always dressed in her best clothes, but tonight she looked different. She was wearing her usual attire but had removed her signature hat, and there was a strange mark on her forehead. She glanced up at me from the window, gave a small wave, and then stepped into the carriage. I stood there in shock, unsure if I waved back. My body felt heavy as I watched the driver close the door, climb back into the carriage, and ride off. As the carriage moved past the park, it vanished without a trace. I remained on the couch, frozen, unable to process what I had just seen. It felt like 15 minutes passed before my uncle woke up and asked why I was still awake. I brushed it off, blaming my back pain, and went to bed without even touching my tea. The next morning, there was chaos in the apartment. An ambulance was parked outside. I found out that the elderly neighbor had been discovered dead. She had apparently slipped, hit her head on a dining table, and passed away. The landlord, concerned when no one answered the door and the woman's dog kept barking, had used a master key to enter and check on her. That's when everything clicked. What I had seen the night before wasn't just a dream or my tired imagination. It was real. When I told my family about the carriage and the neighbor waving at me, my aunt immediately took me to a nearby church. She believed what I had witnessed was a death carriage, a supernatural vehicle that escorted souls to the afterlife. She prayed over me, asking for protection for me and the rest of the family. Since that night, I've done some research and discovered that stories of death carriages appear in various cultures. It was unsettling to witness such an eerie event, but there was also something strangely comforting about it. It was almost as if the neighbor's passing was part of a greater plan, one that I could not fully understand. Growing up, my siblings and I always called a certain part of our house the haunted hallway. It was a narrow, dimly lit corridor with 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a laundry room branching off from it. My sister's room was at one end, my brother's room directly across from hers, and my oldest brother's room was on the side. From the time I was a child, there was something about that hallway that just felt wrong. Whether it was the bright daylight or the dead of night, the moment you stepped into that hall, it was as if the air grew thicker. It never failed to make us uneasy. Even visitors would comment on how unsettling it felt. Over the years, we joked about it being haunted. We didn't know much about spirits back then, but we all sensed something was off. Now, I think it's more likely a lingering, restless presence, but at the time, we couldn't quite put it into words. All we knew was that something wasn't right. Things escalated once my oldest brother started dating his girlfriend. Let's call her Maggie for this story. Before Maggie, we had all felt the tension in that hallway, often closing our doors, afraid that we were being watched. The sensation was intense, like we weren't welcome there, and we'd hurry through the hallway to get to the living room or the kitchen, anywhere but that narrow space. Maggie, though, was different. She had always been sensitive to the paranormal and believed in spirits wholeheartedly. She was even learning to open her third eye, a term for becoming more attuned to spirits and their presence. She had a close friend who was a medium, someone who could communicate with spirits. Early in their relationship, she went to see this medium for a session. At the time, the medium knew nothing about my brother, Maggie, or our house. During the session, the medium started sketching something on a piece of paper, guided by the spirits she was in contact with. When she finished, she asked Maggie if the drawing looked familiar. It was the floor plan of our house. The medium circled the hallway, and then she asked, "Has anything unusual ever happened here?" Maggie explained that the hallway always felt cold, oppressive, and unwelcoming, and the medium nodded knowingly. She revealed that there was a male spirit attached to that space, one that didn't like people intruding. The medium described the spirit as territorial and angry, feeling that the hallway was his domain. He didn't want to harm anyone, but he resented the presence of others in what he considered his space. The medium said that when we felt that rush to get out of the hallway or the sudden discomfort, it was the spirit asserting his control. After Maggie shared what the medium had told her, things started to make more sense, but the knowledge only made everything feel more sinister. Knowing the spirit was aware of us seemed to make it stronger, more assertive. Soon, strange things started happening in the house. Maggie and I would often watch TV together, only to have it turn off by itself. At the same time, the stereo in the other room would blare to life, playing random radio stations. This happened so often that it became almost routine. Whenever it occurred, we'd turn off the stereo, turn the TV back on, and try to ignore it. But when I was alone, I couldn't handle it. The fear would set in, and I'd leave the house, waiting until someone else came home. I knew I was letting the spirit win, but the fear was unbearable alone. What was even stranger was that the activity always seemed to happen when it was just me, Maggie, or my oldest brother in the house. When the rest of the family or any guests were around, nothing unusual ever occurred. My other brother, who was a skeptic, admitted that the hallway felt off but dismissed it as his imagination. My parents didn't believe in any of it, chalking it up to nerves or just bad vibes. Eventually, the strange events stopped. For a while, it seemed like the spirit had moved on. I began to relax again. As time went by, my siblings moved out, and I was left alone in the house with my parents. I took over my oldest brother's room, the one closest to the hallway, and for the first time in a long while, things seemed to return to normal. I was relieved, thinking that the supernatural experiences were finally behind me. My first experience with the paranormal happened when I was 13, and it's one of the scariest moments of my life. I'm 19 now, but the memory is still as clear as if it happened yesterday. Before I share the details of that night, I need to tell you about two things that happened to my older sister and my oldest brother. These incidents are connected to my own, and when you hear them, you'll understand why the whole situation was so unsettling. One morning, my sister, who was only a couple of years older than me, burst into my room, tears streaming down her face. She was shaking so badly it took her a minute to explain what had happened. She told me she had a dream the night before that she was lying in bed, with her curtains open. In the dream, she saw a man standing outside her window, holding a piece of bamboo. She said that, in the dream, he snapped the bamboo over his knee while staring at her. She woke up with a jolt, only to realize that her curtains were still closed, just like always. The next morning, before she came to talk to me, she opened the curtains to let in the morning light. When she did, she found two half-snapped bamboo sticks lying on the floor of her room. She showed them to me and told me about her dream. We searched the house, careful not to let our parents find out, because they didn't like us talking about ghosts. But we couldn't find anything made of bamboo anywhere. I asked her to describe the man. She said he was tall, with a small top hat, and wore a long, dark coat. When she said that, my skin crawled. I told her she had to tell our oldest brother about this and describe the man to him, just like she did with me. A few months earlier, my oldest brother had told me about something strange that had happened to him. He said he had woken up one night to find a tall man standing at the foot of his bed, just staring at him. The next morning, he showed me two small indentations in the carpet where the man had been standing, right at the foot of the bed. They weren't clear footprints, but they were shaped enough like feet that we couldn't ignore them. When my brother described the man, I got chills. He said the same thing my sister did. The man was tall, wore a small top hat, and had a long, dark coat. Hearing their stories together was terrifying. Both of them seemed so genuinely scared, and that made me even more uneasy. Was this the same man? Who was he, and what did he want? Our house always had a strange, unsettling feel to it, especially in the hallway where all the bedrooms were. We used to brush it off as our imagination, but now that I think back, I believe there was something more to it. At the time, I wondered if my siblings were just playing a prank on me, but they've always sworn their stories were true. Now, as I've gotten older, I believe them. A year later, when I was 13, I had my first experience. I was lying in bed, caught in that strange state between sleep and wakefulness, when I suddenly heard the laughter of a child, maybe around my age. It snapped me wide awake. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then I heard it again. This time, I knew it was real. Terrified, I pulled the blanket up to my face, hoping the noise would stop. But instead of stopping, the laughter turned into words. A boy's voice, high-pitched and cheerful, said, "Come on, Ben, come and play with us. We'll wait out back for you." I froze. The fear I felt was like nothing I'd ever known. Then I heard another voice, a softer, older woman's voice. She said, "No, Ben, you're not allowed to play now. Don't listen to him. He's a bad influence. Just go to sleep." I didn't know what to do. In a panic, I covered my ears and squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the voices. I hummed my favorite song in my head, something that always helped me calm down when I was scared, until I eventually fell asleep. The experience didn't last long, but it felt like hours. That night, I had disturbing dreams, and when I woke up, I was still shaken. The next morning, I told my sister and brother what had happened, and to my surprise, they didn't laugh or brush me off. They believed me, and they seemed almost sorry that I had gone through it. That wasn't something I was used to from them. To this day, I remember that night so vividly, and just thinking about it now still gives me the chills. When I was 12, my brother introduced me to his friend Gary. Gary was 5 years older than me, but he was so easygoing and friendly. That night, we all sat down for a spicy chili dinner, one of my dad's favorite dishes. I remember it well because we were all chugging ice-cold water to cool down. At that time, my brother and sister would often have their friends over, and I loved hanging out with them in the backyard. They always made me feel included, even though I was the youngest. Over the next few years, I spent a lot of time with Gary. By the time I was 14, our conversations had become more personal, more real. But when I turned 15, something shifted. One night after everyone else had left, Gary and I were cleaning up together. We sat down and started talking, and he surprised me by saying he remembered the first time we met. He even mentioned my old pink glasses. I was taken aback. He smiled at me, that smile that said everything, like he really cared. That night we held hands, kissed, and talked until sunrise. Gary admitted he was confused about the age difference and wondered what my brother would think, but we both knew there was something special between us. Over the years, Gary and I kept running into each other. When I turned 16, I invited him to my high school prom, but he politely declined, saying it wasn't really his thing. Around the same time, I started dating someone from my school. Then, one night, Gary showed up at a party asking to see me. We kissed again, but I stopped it. I didn't want to hurt anyone. After that, we drifted apart. At 17, I threw a party for my sister's 21st birthday. Gary was there, and after everyone left, he pulled me aside, kissed me again, and gave me his number. We stayed in touch with occasional phone calls and letters, but my boyfriend at the time was very controlling, and I never managed to make it to any of Gary's shows. When I was 18, something tragic happened. A close friend of my brother's, Rob, passed away unexpectedly. I called Gary just to check in on him, and we had a long, deep conversation. He admitted that he hated seeing me with someone else, but we didn't talk about it much. Soon after, Gary started dating someone and had a beautiful son. Years went by, and our lives changed. I went through some tough relationships, and Gary focused on raising his son. We still saw each other every now and then, but things were different. Then, when I was 24, I ran into Gary at a music gig. It felt like no time had passed at all. He hugged me tightly, shared that his girlfriend had cheated on him, and that they had split up. We swapped numbers again and tried to catch up, but my life was a mess. I was in a toxic relationship and had a breakdown that led to a short stay in the hospital. During that time, my phone was stolen, along with Gary's number. 5 months later, while I was staying at my parents' house, I heard the phone ring. My mom came into my room and told me that Gary had passed away from a drug overdose. I was devastated. I just sat there, speechless, overwhelmed by shock and grief. Months later, I was lying in bed at a friend's house, thinking about Gary. I started to cry, wishing I could know if he was okay. And that's when I felt it. A soft, gentle touch on my arm, like a comforting hand. It was so familiar, like it was him. I whispered, "Gary, is that you?" and felt the touch again. A wave of calm washed over me, and for the first time since his passing, I felt at peace. I knew it was him. Since that night, I've felt Gary's presence many times. Sometimes it's a tingle or the feeling that someone is near me. I'll ask him things, and even though I don't hear words, I feel like I know the answers, as if we're communicating without speaking. A year ago, I went to a psychic expo. Without me saying a word, the psychic mentioned Gary and said he wanted me to know that his passing had been an accident. He didn't want me to feel sad and loved it when I smiled. She also told me he regretted not going to my high school prom and confirmed that when I feel him near me, it's because he's watching over me as well as his family. Now, whenever I think about Gary or feel his presence, I smile and thank him for caring. It's comforting to know that even beyond this life, there's someone still watching out for me. He reminds me to be my best self, and for that, I'll always be grateful. I've always been drawn to the paranormal, even as a kid. Growing up in a family that moved frequently, I was often left to my own devices, and that's when my imagination ran wild. I'd create entire worlds in my mind, and sometimes imaginary friends came along with them. My parents didn't exactly encourage it. They thought it was odd, but they never took it too seriously. To be honest, though, I've always found living people scarier than any ghost could ever be. My name's and I'm 15 years old now. Strange things still happen to me. things that I can't really explain. This story, though, is one of the more unsettling experiences I've had. One weekend, I decided to stay over at my older sister's house. My home, sitting just off a busy highway, was constantly buzzing with noise, and it was driving me crazy. I needed a break from it all. The moment I stepped into her house, though, a weird feeling washed over me, like there was a heavy presence in the air, something that didn't belong. During the day, my sister and I would sit in her living room watching TV, while her two kids, my nephews, ran around playing their games. Even with the TV showing their favorite cartoons, the kids couldn't be bothered to pay attention to it for long. Eventually, my sister switched the channel to Ghost Hunters, which caught me by surprise. She had always been skeptical about that kind of stuff, so it was strange to see her tuning into a ghost hunting show. As she explained it, she had once gone on a ghost tour in a creepy old medical building in Beechworth, and after that night, she couldn't deny that something was out there. As she spoke, her cat approached me. I reached down to pet him, and he nudged my arm. But then, his eyes went wide with terror, and he bolted away like he had seen something he couldn't understand. My sister kept glancing over her shoulder, looking uneasy. I asked her if something was wrong, and she brushed it off, saying, "Oh, it's just the cat." But her tone made it clear that there was more to it. It was as if she didn't want to alarm me. Later that evening, her boyfriend took me and the kids to the store for groceries. When we returned, I immediately noticed that all the windows and doors were wide open. My sister said she had burned something in the kitchen, but the smell wasn't the usual scent of burnt food. It had a peculiar, ashy quality to it, like something was burning that shouldn't have been. When I went into her room, I saw the sage burning on her nightstand. I knew that sage was used in cleansing rituals, often to clear out bad energy. I didn't mention it in front of the kids, but once they were in bed, I pulled my sister aside and asked what was going on. She seemed hesitant at first, but then she admitted, "I've been feeling something in the house, like there's an energy here that wasn't here before. It's been bothering me for a while. The sage just helps calm me down. I've done it before." That night, I couldn't sleep. I suffer from insomnia, so I usually stay up late reading or watching TV. Around midnight, I heard a loud crash coming from the kitchen. Thinking it was just the cat again, I reached for the light switch, but when I flipped it on, I saw that a tin of milk powder had fallen to the floor. I cleaned it up, sat back down, and tried to get comfortable again. But then I heard another noise. This time, I stood up and walked into the kitchen. To my shock, every drawer and cupboard in the room was open, as though someone had rifled through them. A cold chill ran down my spine as I stood there, feeling like someone, or something, was watching me. I quickly closed all the drawers, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. But when I turned around to leave, I froze. In the laundry room, which was barely lit, I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing perfectly still. The shape was so clear, I could almost make out the outline of a person. My heart raced, and I found myself backing up against the refrigerator, unable to move. The kitchen light above me began flickering, and the figure slowly began moving toward me, its shadow stretching toward me like it was reaching out. I couldn't even scream. The fear was paralyzing. Just then, my sister rushed into the room, drawn by the flickering light. As soon as she stepped inside and glanced toward the laundry room, the figure vanished, and the light stopped flickering. She rushed over to me, noticing how pale and shaken I was. I told her what had happened, and she looked at me with a kind of resigned expression. "Things like this have been happening a lot lately," she confessed. "I don't know why, but this thing keeps showing up. Oddly enough, I don't think it's dangerous. It doesn't seem like it wants to hurt anyone. It just seems like it wants attention." Her words calmed me a little. I sat back down on the couch, trying to focus on the TV, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned around again, and there it was, again. But this time it felt different, less threatening, more like it was just there, lingering, waiting. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, "Sorry," and just like that, it disappeared. About 12 years ago, something happened that I'll never forget. At the time, I was working as a delivery driver for a soda company, handling a regular route through a small town called Pine Lake, which was nestled away in rural Ohio. Over the years, I'd experienced my fair share of strange premonitions, some small, others more significant, but I'd come to accept them as a normal part of my life. Still, there were a few that truly stood out, and this particular one saved my life. The night before this event, I had a dream, but not just any dream. It was vivid and unsettling. In the dream, I was driving down a winding road on the outskirts of town, a road I knew all too well from my deliveries. Suddenly, my truck swerved uncontrollably, and I found myself in a horrible crash. The moment of impact, the sensation of dying, it felt so real, so palpable, that I woke up shaken to my core. I could still feel the aftershocks of that crash long after I opened my eyes. It was unlike any dream I had ever had. This wasn't just a nightmare. It felt like a warning. When I woke up the next morning, the dream lingered with me, hanging over me like a dark cloud. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that I had to pay attention to what I had experienced. After all, I had premonitions before, some trivial and others more urgent, but none as clear or intense as this one. I knew better than to ignore it. That day began just like any other. I carried out my deliveries through the familiar streets of Pine Lake, the air thick with the early autumn chill, the trees rustling in the wind. Everything felt normal. That is, until it was time to head home. Normally, I would take the main road through town, Route 18, the same route I had seen in my dream. It was the most direct route for my truck, and I had driven it countless times without incident. But that gut feeling from my dream wouldn't let me go. I knew, without a doubt, that I couldn't take that road, even if it meant risking a fine for taking my truck down residential streets where it wasn't allowed. I felt a deep, unshakable sense of dread. It wasn't a choice I would normally make, especially with a family to feed and bills to pay. But something told me that ignoring this feeling would be a mistake I couldn't afford. So I took the longer, less convenient route. As I drove, the quiet road seemed almost too peaceful, as though they were hiding some unseen threat. I couldn't stop thinking about my dream and the dark feeling that it wasn't just a random nightmare. When I finally made it home, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But that relief was quickly followed by an unsettling thought. What if I had ignored the dream? What if I had just gone down Route 18 like I always did? Not long after I arrived, the news came on the radio. It was rush hour, so traffic updates were common. But when I heard about the fatal accident on Route 18, my heart nearly stopped. A truck had crashed on the same road I had dreamed about just the night before. The feeling of recognition hit me hard. I knew, without a doubt, that this was the very accident I had seen in my dream. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. The premonition wasn't just some random figment of my imagination. It was a warning that saved my life. To this day, I believe that premonitions aren't some special skill we possess, but rather something we're given, sometimes for reasons we can't fully comprehend. In this case, I was shown what I needed to see, and it made all the difference. A few months ago, my boyfriend and I decided to go on a more intense ghost tour at an old, abandoned site in the heart of the American South. The location had a dark and tragic history dating back to the 1800s, filled with disease outbreaks and untold deaths. We'd done the standard ghost tour there before, but this time we wanted to experience something much more extreme. This special tour included 2 psychic mediums who shared chilling stories, tried to make connections with the spirits still haunting the site, and used various tools like divining rods to communicate. At first, the atmosphere felt almost too theatrical. We were gathered in a dimly lit room that looked like it came straight out of a horror movie set, flickering lights casting red hues across the walls, benches lined up like an old theater. My boyfriend was the first to try out the divining rods, and almost immediately, they started moving. One by one, everyone who gave them a go had the same eerie reaction. Toward one corner of the room, the mediums explained that the space was owned by a grumpy male spirit. As we ventured closer, that corner of the room had a strange, uncomfortable presence. We only took a few photos, respecting the uneasy feeling of intrusion, though one of the shots did capture an orb floating in the air. The tour became even more captivating as it went on. I've always been able to sense when spirits are near, not by seeing them, but through an inexplicable feeling that sweeps over me. But that night, the sensation was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. We made our way to an old shower block beneath a dining hall once used by working-class passengers. Only 4 people were allowed in at a time, so when it was my turn, I stepped inside, feeling an immediate chill. It wasn't freezing, but it was definitely cooler than the rest of the room. As I stood there, I started feeling a strange tingling sensation in my hands, like pins and needles. It wasn't alarming, just odd. One of the guides called out, asking if anyone had felt anything. No one else seemed to notice, but when the guide specifically mentioned sensations in the hands, I hesitated before admitting, yeah, and quickly exited the room. I didn't say anything to my boyfriend at first, but when he came out, he described feeling the same cool breeze followed by tingling in his hands. Later, I spoke to the guide, and she explained, that's how I sense spirits, too. It was the first time I'd ever had a physical reaction to a spirit, and it was truly fascinating. The next stop on the tour was a small house that I immediately sensed was inhabited by 2 cranky male spirits. Before sharing my thoughts with the guide, I wandered through the house, exploring on my own. The back room felt especially heavy, like it was off limits, as though I wasn't meant to be there. Another room off the kitchen had a similar vibe. While alone in that room, I heard a distinct knock coming from inside the wardrobe. When I approached, it felt like a man was standing just beyond it, leaning toward me to intimidate me. It worked. I quickly left the room. The guide later confirmed there were indeed 2 male spirits in the house, and they didn't like visitors. As we made our way to the next location, I thought I caught a glimpse of a dark shadow, possibly the silhouette of a woman in a long dress, out of the corner of my eye. I wasn't sure if it was a trick of the light, but when we stopped near the area, the guides mentioned that spirits had been known to linger around the staff housing. It's possible I saw something, but I can't say for certain. The hospital on the property had always unsettled me. The first time I visited, I felt nauseous, but the moment I left, the sensation faded. This time, both my boyfriend and I heard a faint whistling sound, and I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my rib. The hospital always gives me a strange sense of unease. The tour concluded at the infamous shower blocks, an area I absolutely dread. I've never been able to walk the entire length of the hallway. Both times I've visited, I've only made it to the 3rd or 4th stall before I have to leave. The air in that hallway is thick, as if 1,000 eyes are watching you. I told my boyfriend to take a photo of the hallway, especially near the 2nd stall where I felt the spirit's presence. Sure enough, when we looked at the photo, there was an orb right where I had sensed the spirit. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This is the earliest memory I have of anything supernatural, and it's still the clearest, probably the most solid, evidence-based experience I've ever had. I must have been around 4 years old just before I started kindergarten. My mom was heavily pregnant with my little sister at the time. We were renting a small house on the edge of a quiet town, not far from the school I would soon attend. We had been living there for a few months, and everything had been normal, until one strange night. That night, someone started egging our house. I remember it vividly, partly because my curiosity got the best of me, and I ended up tasting some of the raw egg off the wall. Big mistake. Trust me, that's a taste you never forget. It must have been around 2 a.m. when something unusual happened. My dad woke up to what he described as a slap on his leg. He'd been wearing shorts to bed since it was summer, and the slap landed right in the middle of his exposed thigh. The next morning, Dad accused my mom of slapping him in his sleep. But here's the thing, my mom is a small woman, the kind you'd think could be snapped in half with a strong hug. My dad, on the other hand, is a huge guy, well over 6 feet tall, When he showed my mom the mark on his leg, there was a clear handprint. But when my mom placed her hand over it, it was way too small to match the print. My dad's hand was far too large. They were both baffled. That's when things started getting strange. Every morning, when my mom got up to help me get ready for school, she'd find all the kitchen chairs stacked on the table. This was weird because my dad never put the chairs on the table. He thought it was unhygienic, and my mom couldn't have done it either since she was too pregnant to lift them. She'd grumble as she took the chairs down each day. One time, while doing so, she dropped a chair when my sister kicked especially hard from inside her belly. The chair broke a leg clean off. But what really unnerved my parents happened at night. I used to sleep on a mattress on the floor in their room because it was summer, and they had the only air conditioner. Like any kid, I'd kick my blankets off because it was too hot. They'd sit there and watch as the blankets would lift up by themselves and gently get tucked back over me. I wasn't moving at all. They saw it with their own eyes. Eventually, my parents contacted the landlord to ask if he knew anything strange about the house. He explained that the house had belonged to his mother, who had been very proud of it and kept it spotless, especially when her grandchildren visited. He also mentioned that she had passed away in the house from a heart attack. My parents figured she was still watching over the place. Maybe that slap on Dad's leg was her way of waking him up to chase off the kids who were egging the house. After that night, it seemed like she stayed active, just keeping an eye on things. We stayed in that house for about another year, moving out when my sister was around 6 months old because my mom was pregnant again and we needed more space. Looking back, I thought it was kind of cool, like having an invisible babysitter. She didn't do much, just tucked my blankets back on me, even when I didn't want them. But to my young mind, it felt comforting. Not everyone saw it the same way, though. My uncle was terrified of the house. Whenever he visited, he wouldn't even step inside. He'd stay on the porch, refusing to come in. I always found that funny. It was one of those nights when I just needed a break from home, so I headed over to my friend's place. She and I had been close for years, and she even given me a spare key for whenever I needed to escape. That evening, I needed some peace, as things at home had been tense with my parents. After some time, I felt exhausted, so I made my way to the guest bedroom, which had unofficially become my little retreat. It was just me and my friend's boyfriend at the house, and he was already fast asleep in the room across the hall. I pulled the knitted throw over me and tried to relax. I found myself caught in that strange in-between state where I wasn't fully asleep, but I wasn't really awake either. My eyes were closed, but I could still sense everything around me. That's when I noticed something, an unsettling feeling that someone was standing just outside the door, watching me. It wasn't like I saw anything, but you know that feeling when you just know someone is there, even if you can't see them, like when your mom checks on you late at night. At first, I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the sensation wouldn't fade. It only grew stronger, almost like whatever, or whoever it was, had moved closer, now standing right beside my bed. And then, I felt something, a light touch on my cheek. I jolted, my eyes snapping open. Before I could even sit up, the pressure on my face increased. And then, I felt a strange weakness, as though my energy was being drained away. I was wide awake, but completely paralyzed. No matter how much I willed my body to move, nothing happened. The touch on my cheek shifted, and it started to stroke my skin gently. Even now, it's hard to explain, but in that moment, I almost felt like it was curious, affectionate even, but at the time, all I felt was fear. The pressure on my shoulder shifted, and I was suddenly rolled onto my back. That's when I felt the hand slowly run down my spine, stopping just above my lower back. I managed to open my eyes a little, but all I could see was a pillow pressed against my chin, blocking most of my view. Panic surged through me. I've always been uncomfortable with anything too close to my face when I'm asleep, and I was afraid I might suffocate. The pressure on my shoulders grew heavier, holding me down. Then I felt two hands cup my face, lifting my head slightly off the pillow beneath me. For what felt like forever, the pressure stayed intense, before suddenly, it stopped. Whatever it was had gone. The pillow that had been near my chin was back where it belonged under my head. I lay there, frozen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My legs felt like jelly, trembling so badly that I had to brace myself against the walls as I stumbled into the living room. I curled up on the couch and stayed there, just waiting until it was time to pick my friend up from her class. I knew it wasn't a dream. I bruise easily, and when I checked my shoulders, I found 2 red marks where the pressure had been. They didn't bruise and faded pretty quickly, but it was enough to convince me that something real had happened. Looking back, I don't think whatever it was meant me any harm. It didn't feel threatening, more like it was just curious. But I can't shake the mystery of why it chose that night to make its presence known. It was terrifying, yes, but now I'm more puzzled than scared. What was it really after? This story takes me back to when I was about 10 or 11 years old. Every couple of months, my family, my mom, dad, sister, and I, would drive down to my aunt's house in Pine Creek, a small town about 125 miles south of Houston, Texas. Pine Creek is known for its sprawling farmland, and my aunt and uncle's house sat on a hill with a beautiful view of the surrounding countryside. It was a peaceful and picturesque place, but there was always something a little unsettling about it, especially after dark. From their back porch, you could see a vast field about 200 feet away. It didn't belong to my family, but it was close enough to wander into, and during the day, that's exactly what we did. One afternoon, my sister Sarah, my cousin Charlie, and I decided to explore the field. We climbed over a rusty wire fence and started running between the tall grasses. Each of us claimed a lane between the swaying stalks, racing to see who could get to the other side the fastest. During one race, I remember running about 60 or 70 feet, glancing over to my left to see how far behind Sarah and Charlie were. I could catch glimpses of them through the field as I sprinted, but when I turned my head forward, I saw someone running beside me in the lane to my right. It startled me because it didn't make sense. No one else was with us. It was a boy, maybe around my age or a little younger. He was wearing jeans and a faded plaid shirt. He was smiling, looking right at me and laughing. I stopped in my tracks, heart racing, and turned to get a better look, but he was gone. I asked Sarah and Charlie if they had seen him, but they both said no. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was nothing, and we went back to racing. Later, we decided to race back toward the house. I was in the middle with Sarah on my left and Charlie on my right, this time about 30 feet from the end. I glanced at Sarah and saw the same boy running alongside her, in the lane to her left. He was laughing again, just like before. Sarah saw him too. We both stopped, wide-eyed, trying to make sense of it. We ran over to the spot where we had seen him, but there was no one there. It didn't add up. There was nowhere for him to hide so quickly. That night, we told our parents what we had seen, but they brushed it off and didn't want to talk about it. After all, my aunt and uncle were devout Baptists, and their beliefs didn't leave room for supernatural experiences. They saw such things as evil and best ignored. Over the years, similar things kept happening during our visits. I saw that boy in the field 3 or 4 more times. Each time he would look directly at me, as if to say, "I know you can see me," and then disappear into the air like he was never there. My cousin once mentioned seeing a little girl peeking out from behind a tree, but I only ever saw the boy. Even now, I can still picture him clearly, the way he'd laugh, run beside us, and then vanish as though he was never part of the world we were in. It wasn't exactly frightening, but it was definitely disconcerting. When my grandfather passed away, my father was just 12 years old. Growing up, it was a topic no one ever discussed. Whenever us grandkids asked, the room would fall silent. We didn't know much about him, not even his side of the family. Did he have brothers or sisters? It was as though he had never existed. As I grew older, my curiosity about my family's history only deepened. My grandfather's unique last name became a clue that eventually led me to someone online who shared it. This connection led me to a man whose father had been my grandfather's younger brother, and he shared the strange story I'm about to tell you. My grandfather had been a hard-working man, a taxi driver in a small town, known for his generosity. He worked long hours every day, starting at the crack of dawn and finishing late into the night. Despite the long shifts, he always made sure his wife and 8 kids had food on the table. My father was the second oldest of the children. After a long day's work, my grandfather would spend whatever little extra money he had on a cold bottle of beer to unwind. One early morning, everything changed. My grandfather came home late, dragging himself inside. The children were asleep, but the sound of my grandmother's terrified scream woke them all. My grandfather, pale as the ghostly white walls of the house, was gasping for breath as though the air had turned thick and suffocating. My grandmother, not knowing what else to do, cried out for help, and the eldest son ran to fetch the town's mayor. The mayor arrived quickly, glanced at my grandfather, and immediately instructed my father to go get the elder woman, the local healer. The elder came in swiftly, but upon seeing my grandfather, she began to cry. She sat beside him, stroked his head, and wailed, "Is this what happens to a man just trying to help?" Then, as if she were addressing some unseen presence, she shouted angrily at the spirits in the room. The elder then ordered the children to leave, telling them they could not say goodbye to their father. Once we were outside, she began chanting in a low voice, attempting to understand what had happened. My grandfather started crying too, his voice trembling as he spoke. That night, I was driving through the old country roads far from town. I saw 3 women walking down the middle of the road. It was late, and I felt sorry for them, knowing how far it was to the nearest village. I stopped and offered them a ride. They accepted, and we chatted as I drove, trying to stay awake. I cracked jokes, asked questions, and they answered, laughing along with me. It wasn't until we reached the village that I asked where they wanted me to drop them off. One of the women pointed ahead and said, "Just up there." But when I turned around to say goodbye, the car was empty. No one was in it. After that, my grandfather's memory became hazy. Whatever had happened to him that night seemed to drain him entirely, both physically and spiritually. My father and his siblings never liked hearing about spirits. They firmly believed they didn't exist. But to me, the story of my grandfather's encounter has always been strange and compelling. He was a good man just trying to help, yet something unexplainable happened to him that night. And to this day, I can't help but wonder what truly happened to him on that long, lonely road. Over the past 8 years, I've had countless experiences with the paranormal. I never sought them out, have never used a Ouija board or tried to contact spirits. It's just not something that interests me. Honestly, I hate these encounters. They've caused me a lot of fear and sleepless nights, and all I want is for them to stop. It all started when I was 17. I was living with my boyfriend in a small house on the edge of town. He often worked late nights, so I would come home to an empty house. Every time I unlocked the sliding glass door, I'd see shadows moving around inside. It always seemed like someone was there. But every time, I'd check every room, lock every window, but I never found anyone. One night, as I was drifting off to sleep, there was a loud bang on the wall right next to my head. I jumped out of bed and turned on the light. The window blinds were swinging back and forth, despite the windows and doors being shut tight, with no breeze. I couldn't make sense of it. Another time, while I was packing clothes for my boyfriend's mom, I came across a bright, ugly shirt. I threw it into the pile and stepped out for a drink. When I came back, the shirt was laid flat on the floor, a few feet away from the chair, yet the other clothes I'd stacked on top hadn't moved an inch. The scariest thing that happened in that house occurred during a fight with my boyfriend. He threw my phone at the ceiling through a hole in the roof. When I climbed up to retrieve it, I felt a cold wind sweep through me, even though there were no openings in the ceiling. My flashlight died twice while I was up there. After that, I refused to go up again. A year later, I moved in with my cousin at a new development on the outskirts of town. The house was part of a brand new estate, so I didn't expect anything strange. but the moment I stepped through the door, I felt a strange, unexplainable fear, especially in my bedroom at the end of a long hallway. One night, while sitting in the living room, I heard the door to the garage creak open. I went to check, and sure enough, it was wide open, even though the lock was still engaged. I shut it and rattled the handle to make sure it wouldn't open again. But a few minutes later, it swung open again. Too terrified to deal with it, I left it open all night. I decided to face my fear and try sleeping in my room. But as soon as I turned off the lights, I heard footsteps coming from the kitchen, down the hall, and into my room. The footsteps paced back and forth beside my bed. I was so terrified. I turned on every light in the house. When I asked the spirit to leave me alone, I heard a knock from the ceiling in response. Things only got worse when my cousin's wife and daughter came back. His 4-year-old daughter often ran to my bed at night, crying that she saw shadow people in her room. The lights in her room would go out, and her toys would mysteriously stop working until morning. It was all incredibly unsettling. When I moved to a sheep farm in the desert, I thought I'd left all that behind. But the strange knocking on windows and unexplained door slams followed me there too. Now at university, the activity has gotten worse. I've woken up gasping for air, felt cold fingers brush down my arm, and seen shadows dart across my room. Objects have fallen off shelves, clothes have dropped from hangers, and there are impressions on my bed, like someone sat there. The most chilling experience was when I felt a hand pat my foot, then my knee, and then sharply tug my blanket down, twice in a row. I was frozen in place, unable to move. Since that night, I can't sleep in the dark anymore. I keep a lamp or the TV on, and I don't truly relax until the sun comes up. I've tried everything, seeing a doctor, getting medication, but I know that what I've experienced isn't just in my head. I'm genuinely freaked out right now. I mean, I've always been a bit jumpy, especially when it comes to anything supernatural. But this was different. I'm truly scared. Here's what happened. Our house is set up in a way where the kitchen, living room, and study are all at one end, and there's a long hallway that leads to the bedrooms and bathroom. The hallway has always made me uneasy. It's one of those places that just feels wrong. If you're standing in the kitchen and looking toward the living room, you can see all the way down the hallway, so there's no way someone could sneak past without being noticed. That detail is important. So there I was, standing in the kitchen, making myself a snack, peanut butter and crackers. I know, I'm simple. I saw my dog, Muffin, a small poodle, Shih Tzu mix, dash past me and into the living room. He was barking like crazy, which wasn't out of the ordinary. He always gets worked up when he thinks someone's about to leave without him. Then I saw who I thought was my dad walking toward the front door. That made sense. Muffin was barking at him, just like he always does. I didn't think much of it until I heard my mom, who was in the study, call out to my dad, and he answered from down the hallway. I froze. Maybe I misheard, I thought, but when I turned my head toward the hallway, I saw my dad's bedroom light on, and his shadow moving across the wall. That's when my heart started to race. "Dad, where are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. "I'm down here," he responded casually, but it only made my stomach drop. I turned back toward the living room. Muffin was still barking at the door, where I'd seen what looked like my dad just moments before. I hoped maybe my little sister had wandered into my parents' room, but just then, my dad stepped out of his bedroom. "What's wrong?" my mom asked, hearing the panic in my voice. "Who's in the living room?" I managed to choke out. "No one," she replied, confused. My dad started walking down the hallway toward me, also asking what was going on. I insisted that someone had been standing by the living room doorway. Muffin had been barking at them. He went to investigate, and I followed, shaking. But when we turned the corner into the living room, there was no one there. The doors were locked from the inside, and there hadn't been any sound of them opening or closing. I checked behind the couch, under the chairs, everywhere someone could hide. Nothing. But Muffin was still barking. I felt like I was going to lose it. I know I saw someone. It wasn't a trick of the light or my imagination. I saw an arm and part of a man's body turning the corner into the doorway. He even looked like my dad. Same jacket, same everything. Now it's 11:25 p.m., and there's no way I'm going to sleep tonight. I have work tomorrow and exams next week, but I can't even focus. The image of that figure won't leave me. My mom thinks it was just a reflection from the TV, but I'm not buying it. It felt way too real. In 2009, after a lot of persuasion, my dad finally agreed to let me leave our family home and move closer to the city. The arrangement was simple. My parents would buy the house, and I would rent it from them. That way, if I ran into any financial trouble, they could help me out. After months of searching, I found a place that felt perfect. It was a renovated cottage in the small town of Pine Lake, just on the outskirts. A quaint 3-bedroom home with a rustic charm, a beautiful brick fireplace and old oak floors that creaked when you walked across them. My parents made an offer, and we moved in on May 15th. At first, everything seemed fine, but I soon noticed something odd. The house was always cold. No matter the time of year, no matter how high the thermostat went, it never quite warmed up. It just felt off. Even after my parents installed a new heater, the chill lingered. Over the next year or so, I started to feel uncomfortable there. It wasn't a place that ever felt like home, just a house. Things took a turn when my boyfriend, Scott, and I broke up. It was messy, and I ended up spending more and more time away from the house, staying with friends, avoiding the place as much as I could. My brother, Michael, moved in to keep things stable, but eventually, I left entirely, leaving the lease with him. Last week, Michael's girlfriend, Paula, and her 3-year-old daughter, Stephanie, moved in. That's when things got really strange. Stephanie refused to sleep in her room or even go near the middle bedroom. "Mommy, I'm scared. I don't want to sleep in there," she would say. For the first 2 nights, she slept in bed with Michael and Paula. On the second night, Michael felt something. As he was drifting off to sleep, he felt someone sit on his legs and lean over him, as if reaching for Stephanie. He froze, whispering to Paula, explaining what he felt. That's when they realized they had to do something about it. The next day, Paula called her mom, Carrie, who had experience dealing with spirits. Carrie arrived with candles and crystals, prepared to help. She walked through each room, silent but deeply focused. Occasionally, the flames on the candles would flicker wildly, as if something invisible was trying to extinguish them. After her walkthrough, Carrie explained that a man had died in the middle bedroom many years ago. He wasn't malicious, just deeply attached to the house, and he didn't want children living there. He had been particularly fixated on Stephanie and wanted her gone. Carrie assured him that it was time for him to leave, that the house wasn't his home anymore, and gently guided him toward the back door. What happened next was nothing short of eerie. As Carrie stood by the laundry room door, the dogs in the backyard started growling, their bodies tense as they backed away, terrified. The door itself began to rattle as though someone was pounding on it, though it was firmly shut. For about 10 minutes, the air was thick with tension. Then suddenly, everything went still. Carrie declared that the spirit had moved on. The change was immediate. The house no longer felt cold and oppressive. In fact, when Michael lit the fire in the fireplace, it was so warm that they had to open windows and doors to cool it down. For the first time, the house truly felt like a home. But there was one last strange event. Stephanie's crystal, which she kept on her bedside table to help her sleep, had disappeared. We searched everywhere, growing more and more frantic, until we found it, hidden in the ceiling directly above her room. It was as if the spirit had taken it before leaving. Along with the crystal, we found some old photographs, pictures of me and my ex-boyfriend, Scott, tucked into the space above the bed where he used to sleep in the middle bedroom. Looking back, I realized that there had always been something unsettling about that house, but it wasn't until Stephanie moved in that we understood why. I'm just relieved the spirit has moved on, and the house now feels warm and inviting, like it always should have. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. When I was around 13, my family moved to a quiet suburb in Colorado. We had relocated so many times before, moving between different states and even countries, that I lost track of how many schools I had attended. My mom, determined to give my sister and me some stability, finally settled in a charming neighborhood. She and my stepdad found a house in a town called Pine Creek, a place where we could stay for the next 5 years without the constant upheaval of moving. It was a quaint, 2-story house built in the 1950s, with that classic mid-century charm, wide windows, a cozy front porch, and just enough space for the 4 of us. The house had 3 levels, each split into distinct sections. The lowest level was the basement, where we kept the laundry, a small storage area, and a rec room with a pool table. Upstairs on the 2nd floor was the kitchen, dining room, and a living area with a fireplace. The 3rd level was where the bedrooms were. Mine and my sister's rooms faced the front yard, while our parents' room was tucked away in the back, overlooking the dense woods behind the house. The backyard was sloped, with a small garden and a deck that led out from the rec room. My sister and I spent most of our time in that basement rec room. It was a cozy space with a TV, an old computer, and a comfy couch where we could get away from our parents. The air was always a bit chilly, but we didn't think much of it, chalked it up to the concrete floor and how close the basement was to the outside. For months, everything seemed fine, but then something started to change. It was a late afternoon when I first saw her. I was in the rec room, sitting on the couch after an argument with my sister. She'd stormed off to her room, leaving me alone in the dim light. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something moving outside through the window, a flash of white. At first, I thought it was just the sun reflecting off the snow-covered porch, but the sun had already dipped below the horizon. When I looked again, I saw her, a woman, standing in the garden near the bird bath. She had long brown hair twisted into a loose braid, and she was wearing a white shawl that seemed to glow in the dim light. The air felt colder, like a chill had settled in the room. The birds in the bird bath, which had been quiet moments before, fluttered nervously, as if they were aware of her presence. I walked outside, through the back door, thinking it was just a neighbor or a passerby. But by the time I reached the garden, she was gone. I searched the yard, but there was no sign of her. The gate was locked, and there was no way she could have passed without making a sound. It was like she had simply vanished. After that, she started appearing more frequently. My sister saw her a few times, standing by the garden, and I noticed her as well while walking past the kitchen windows. Even my mom thought she'd seen her once, standing by the tree line outside her bedroom window. But whenever we tried to get a closer look or step outside, she would disappear into the woods, as if she had never been there at all. Her presence became a constant in our lives. Cold spots started showing up around the house, mostly in the rec room, by the stairs, and near my sister's piano. There were times, especially at night, when we could feel her watching us, lingering by the kitchen or outside our windows. It was unsettling, but we didn't think much of it, until things started getting worse. My stepdad decided to renovate the house. He was working on fixing up the deck when the strange occurrences began to escalate. Tools would vanish from the workbench, only to reappear in odd places. The tiles he carefully laid would crack as if they were being deliberately broken. It felt like someone, or something, was trying to stop him from making any changes. Then came the fall. He had been on the roof repairing the shingles when, out of nowhere, he lost his footing and fell, about 1.5 stories to the ground. He swore he had been far from the edge when it happened. It felt like something had pushed him. He landed hard, and after that, he couldn't work on the house for weeks. But the strange happenings didn't stop. We'd hear glasses crash to the floor in the middle of the night, footsteps pacing in the hallway when no one was there. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, especially around the bird bath or near the back of the house. Then, just before we decided to move out, the activity took a terrifying turn. Our bird bath, which had once been home to a few finches, became eerily silent. My mom and stepdad started hearing strange noises outside, loud, guttural roars, like a mix between a lion's growl and the winds of a coming storm. The sound would circle the yard, and sometimes it felt like it was right outside their bedroom window. And then, the pounding started, massive thuds on the roof, followed by a silence that felt too thick, too oppressive. My parents tried to convince themselves it was just some large animals, maybe raccoons or possums, but the noise was too heavy, too deliberate. The neighbors never noticed anything, and it seemed like it was just us who were haunted by this presence. It became unbearable, and soon after, we packed up and moved away. But even now, I wonder, what did we really experience there? What happened to that woman in the garden? And why did it all start when we tried to change the house? Around 8 years ago, my family moved into a new house in a quiet, rural town in Texas. It was built on land that used to be a farm, and there was something about the place that felt off from the very start. I was just a kid back then, so I didn't pay too much attention to the weird feeling. It was just a new place, right? Our house was finally ready, and I ended up with the room at the very end of the hall. From the first night, it felt like something was watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling. When I was alone, it was like there was a presence in the room with me. At night, I'd hear heavy footsteps walking on the carpet, like someone wearing boots. It was so loud and distinct that I would crawl under my covers, hoping it would stop. When I told my mom about it, she just said it was because the house was new, that I was nervous. So I tried to ignore it, but it only got worse. A couple of years later, my entire family started noticing strange things. My mom started seeing dark shapes moving along the walls, and objects would shift on their own. Books out of place, cups tipped over, things like that. My sister even tried talking to whatever spirits were in the house to understand why they were there, but nothing ever came from it. In 2009, my cousin came to stay with us for Christmas. She stayed in the spare bedroom, a room none of us liked. It was always freezing, no matter what season it was, and it just felt wrong. The morning after her first night, she told us she woke up to find a man standing over her bed. He was dressed like an old farmer, worn-out boots, and a faded shirt, just staring down at her. Terrified, she spent the rest of her visit sleeping on the couch. At first, it felt like maybe we weren't imagining things, but it also made our fears feel real. Not long after that, I invited my best friend over for a sleepover. Late that night, we heard loud crashes coming from the bathroom near my room. We ran to check and found the bathroom completely destroyed. Glass shattered on the floor, the sink knocked over, everything a mess. The strange part? No one else in the house heard it. It was just us. That's when the dream started. I had one where a little girl in an old, dusty part of the country, maybe the Texas Hill Country, told me her mother had buried her under a tree. In another dream, I saw a man digging up my carpet, pulling out a body. I couldn't shake the images from my mind. And soon after, I started seeing the shadow of a man pacing in my room. I tried talking to him, but he never said a word. It didn't stop there. At night, I began hearing someone call my name over and over again, faint but clear. My cat, who always slept with me, refused to come near me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't get a moment of peace. That's when my sister called in a medium, hoping for some answers. The medium said there were 3 spirits attached to me, 2 men and a little girl. She assured me they weren't dangerous, that they were just lost. For a moment, I felt some relief. But things changed after my sister decided to hold a seance when no one was home. From that moment, the house felt different. The energy in the hall grew stronger, like it was flowing from my room all the way to the front door. We would hear footsteps behind us, soft whispers that seemed to follow us around. The air in the house was thick, like it was charged with something unnatural, and we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was as though the spirits had been awakened, and they were now making their presence known more than ever. When I was around 10 years old, my family experienced a loss that changed everything. My grandfather, who was the strong, protective figure in our lives, passed away unexpectedly after a sudden asthma attack. He and my grandmother had always had a rocky marriage, but despite their differences, he was devoted to his family. My mom, being the oldest of their 4 kids, shared a special bond with him. Unfortunately, this closeness often caused friction with my grandmother and her 2 younger daughters. My grandfather passed just 1 week before my birthday. After falling into a coma, the doctors told us there was no chance he'd wake up. Our family gathered to say goodbye as they turned off his life support. Too devastated to stay in the room, my mom stepped out into the hallway. That's when she heard his voice clear as day, saying, "I've had the bait, Carrie. They finally got me." His death left our family shattered. The rift between my mother and her sisters grew deeper, and my grandmother's resentment toward us only intensified. Without my grandfather to keep things together, we were effectively cut off from the rest of the family. But even after death, it felt like my grandfather was still watching over us. Every year, on the anniversary of his passing, something extraordinary would happen. One year, I woke up because it felt like someone was tucking my blanket in around me. Thinking it was my stepdad, I mumbled a quick thank you, not opening my eyes. A soft male voice, unmistakably my grandfather's, whispered, "Sleep well," and I felt a gentle hand brushing through my hair. When I opened my eyes, though, the room was empty, and the door was shut. Another year, my mom was struggling with work and finances, feeling like she couldn't get a break. One night, as she sat on the couch, barely awake, she felt a weight settle beside her. She heard her father's voice, clear as day, saying, "Everything's going to be all right, Carrie." She tried to wake fully, but sleep overtook her, and the next morning, she told me she felt at peace for the first time in ages. Years later, when my mom was working late one night, she suddenly felt his presence disappear. She said it was like she knew, deep in her gut, that he had finally moved on, no longer needing to watch over us. That same year, my grandmother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Even though we were estranged, my sister and I still went to the hospital to say goodbye. We weren't allowed to see her, but my mom went in alone. When she came out, she was crushed. My grandmother wouldn't even speak to her, let alone look at her. We learned shortly after that she had passed away. After her death, strange things started happening to my mom. One night she woke up, feeling like someone was pressing down on her throat, unable to move or cry out. The feeling passed after a minute, but her throat was sore for the rest of the day. She started seeing her mother's figure in the yard and around the house, even though my grandmother had never been there. What was even stranger, my mom's favorite photos of my grandfather would always grow mold, no matter how clean and dry the house was. The most unsettling event happened when my stepdad woke up in the middle of the night. My mom was tossing and turning, and when he glanced over, he saw my grandmother standing over her. She reached toward my mom, but as soon as my stepdad sat up, my grandmother turned and looked at him. He said she had the most disturbing snarl on her face before vanishing into thin air. Once she disappeared, my mom's restless sleep returned to normal. My stepdad, who's never believed in anything paranormal, couldn't explain what he had seen. Looking back now, I realized that my grandfather's presence always felt warm and comforting. My grandmother's, on the other hand, felt darker, almost as though she was trying to reach out with a vengeful force. These experiences have stayed with us, sending a chill down our spines every time we think about them. Back in 2009, during the long Easter weekend, my ex-girlfriend Sarah, her brother David, and I decided to take a short trip down to Pine Lake, a quiet town just outside of Seattle, for a weekend of fishing and relaxation. We stayed at my late grandparents' house, a place I hadn't been to since they passed away in 2006. I was incredibly close to them, especially my grandma, and had avoided the house for years because it brought back so many memories, but I decided it was finally time to return. The drive took us about 45 minutes, and when we arrived, it felt like stepping back into another time. The house hadn't changed much, though the garden wasn't as well kept as I remembered. I had shared a lot of stories with Sarah about my interest in the paranormal, so she was a little apprehensive about staying there. I reassured her everything would be fine, though looking back, I might have been a little too confident. Upon arrival, I went next door to get the keys from the neighbor, who had been taking care of the house. As soon as I opened the door, the familiar scent of the house hit me, a mix of old wood and faint dust. It was comforting, but also bittersweet. I couldn't help but say aloud, "Hey, it's me, Fox." That was my childhood nickname, a reminder of the mischievous kid I once was. Sarah looked at me puzzled, while David chuckled, but it helped calm my nerves. The first odd thing happened around 5:30 p.m., just as we were preparing to go into town for dinner. Sarah was in the bathroom, which had been added on when my grandparents expanded the house. This area, particularly the bathroom, had always been my grandmother's domain. She even had a small bedroom off to the side that was strictly off limits to anyone. While Sarah was getting ready, David and I were in the living room watching TV. Suddenly, we heard the bathroom door slam shut. Not a moment later, it slammed again, and then a third time, just as loud. This wasn't just a breeze or a loose door. The handle needed to be twisted to open it, and there were no open windows or drafts in sight. Sarah came rushing into the living room, her face pale and filled with shock, almost on the verge of tears. David and I exchanged a long look, still trying to process what had happened. We decided to leave the house for a while to calm our nerves. Sarah was visibly shaken, but once she collected herself, I tried to lighten the mood, joking, "Well, I guess my grandma doesn't like you." I meant it to be funny, but Sarah didn't find it amusing. So I quickly changed the subject to her hair, which made her laugh, if only briefly. When we returned, I suggested Sarah formally introduce herself to my grandparents, especially since my grandma was always big on politeness. Sarah agreed, and after that, she and David didn't experience anything else for the remainder of our stay. I, on the other hand, had a few more encounters. Every night, I was always the last to fall asleep, being a light sleeper. I'd sit in the living room watching TV when I began hearing the unmistakable sound of the old wooden door to the hallway creaking open and closed. I'd glance out of the corner of my eye and could see it move, though I was alone in the room. It happened multiple times, and I knew it couldn't have been Sarah or David. They were both sound asleep right in front of me. There were also footsteps coming from the kitchen, a faint smell of cigarettes, even though no one smoked, and the sound of glasses clinking around the old bar area, just like my grandfather used to do when he was here. Twice, I had to turn off the light in my grandma's bedroom. Once, it had turned itself on while we were inside the house, and the second time, I noticed it glowing faintly as we pulled into the driveway late one night. It was unsettling, to say the least. Despite all of this, I never felt threatened. In fact, it felt like my grandparents were still around, just checking in on me. It was as if they were putting on a little show, just to remind me they were still watching over me. While some moments were eerie, I found comfort in the idea that they might still be looking out for me. That trip made me realize how much I missed them. And though I had experienced strange things with my grandma's spirit before, this time it felt different. It felt like they were at peace. They were just saying hello, and it was good to feel their presence one last time. When I was 8 years old, something happened that only two people besides me know about. It's a memory that still lingers with me, quiet and comforting, and even now, I think about it with a bittersweet feeling. It was late one night around 10:30 p.m. I had just woken up from a dream and decided to head to the kitchen for a glass of water. On my way back to my room, I heard a soft whispering sound coming from the corner where an old rocking chair sat. I paused, listening carefully, but after a moment, the whispering stopped. I told myself it was probably just my imagination and climbed back into bed. As I started to drift back to sleep, I heard something else, a soft humming sound. It came from that same corner where the chair was. Curious, I turned on the light and looked over. There, sitting in the chair, was a small white teddy bear, one that had belonged to my grandmother, who had passed away just a few weeks before. The bear wore a little gold bounty, but what really caught my attention was the shadow across its stomach, something that didn't seem quite right. I suddenly remembered something my grandmother had once told me about how spirits of loved ones might stay close after they passed, lingering around to say goodbye. The thought made my heart achy a little, since I had been missing her so much. But even with that thought, the room didn't feel frightening. Instead, it felt calm and safe, almost like I was wrapped in a warm, comforting hug. The humming continued softly, and my eyes grew heavy with sleep. I turned off the light and lay back down, listening to the gentle sound. Before I finally drifted off, I saw my grandmother's face in my mind, smiling down at me. It felt so real, as if she were there in the room, watching over me. When I look back on that night, I shared the experience with a close friend who has an interest in the paranormal. When I told her about the bear and the humming, she suggested that it was likely my grandmother's way of saying goodbye. It made sense to her. The bear had always been a gift from my grandmother, and she had sung to me often when I was little. Maybe, in that moment, my grandmother was simply using the familiar to comfort me one last time, letting me know she was at peace. About 7 years ago, my family and I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in a town called Pine Lake. We had some neighbors, a young couple with 2 kids and 3 cats. Things took a turn when their marriage began to unravel. The wife took the children and one of the cats, leaving her husband behind with the house and the remaining 2 cats. About 6 months later, the husband disappeared, leaving the house to fall into disrepair, along with the 2 cats. One of those cats, a white and tan beauty named Ginger, had already started hanging around our house for food and companionship. When he was abandoned, we officially took him in as our own. Ginger quickly became my best friend. Every day after school, I'd spend hours with him, playing, cuddling, and just enjoying his presence. He meant the world to me. I know it might seem strange to some, to consider a cat your best friend, but that's exactly what Ginger was to me. A year and a half after we brought him in, we moved to a new house. Not long after that, we got a dog as a birthday gift for me. Unfortunately, Ginger's health began to decline soon after. By March 2007, he was sneezing blood, couldn't eat, and seemed to be losing his sense of recognition. It was devastating to see him like that. On March 29, 2007, we took him to the vet, who gave us the heart-wrenching news. Ginger had brain cancer. At nearly 18 years old, the vet said that the kindest thing we could do was let him go. As a 13-year-old who loved him dearly, I was shattered. I begged my parents to find another way, but in the end, we had to say goodbye. The next day, we buried him in our backyard, under a tall oak tree that seemed to have a peaceful stillness about it. Losing Ginger was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced. I made a promise that day to always wear his name tag on my necklace, and I've kept that promise ever since. 3 months after Ginger's passing, I had a dream that still feels as real as any waking memory. In the dream, I was standing in our backyard when I heard a soft meow behind me. I turned around and saw Ginger, sitting by the back door of the house. Overcome with joy and sadness, I ran toward him, desperate to hold him again. But when I reached the door, it wouldn't open. It felt like something was stopping me, holding me back. I cried in frustration, but Ginger remained calm, sitting there as if he was trying to reassure me. Now, as an adult, I believe that dream was Ginger's way of telling me he was still with us, in spirit. He wanted me to know that, even though he was no longer physically there, his love for us hadn't faded. He hadn't truly left. 3 years later, something odd happened. A friend had spent the night, and I hadn't put away the trundle bed yet. I was sitting on the mattress, working at my computer, when I suddenly felt a soft, gentle pressure on my ribs, just under my right arm. At the same time, I noticed small indentations forming on the mattress beside me, as if something was walking on it. I froze, startled, but then it hit me. This felt familiar. It was just like the way Ginger used to rub against my legs when he wanted attention. That thought brought me a sense of comfort. I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, Ginger was visiting me again. Not long ago, my mom told me something that confirmed what I had always felt about Ginger's presence. She had gone to a psychic expo and decided to get a reading. The first thing the psychic asked her was, "Did you used to have a big, fluffy cat?" My mom said yes, and the psychic then said something remarkable. She explained that our current cat, Molly, sometimes acts strangely around my mom because Ginger's spirit was still with us. The psychic said Ginger had taken on the role of one of my mom's spirit guides and that Molly could sense him, which made her uneasy. When I heard that, I felt a rush of emotions. It was like another reminder that Ginger hadn't truly left us. He was still with us in his own way, watching over us. To this day, I still miss Ginger deeply. There are times when I find myself tearing up just thinking about him or talking about the time we spent together. But knowing that he's still here in spirit brings me a sense of peace. Ginger was more than just a pet. He was family, and he'll always have a place in my heart. When I was a teenager, I started seeing what I can only describe as visions. They weren't ghosts in the usual sense. They appeared for just a brief moment, didn't seem to notice me, and then vanished. They never came back, but each encounter left a lasting impression on me. Looking back, I think they made me more attuned to my surroundings. In some strange way, I'm grateful for that awareness. The first time I saw one, I was about 14 years old. My grandmother had passed away years earlier, but I still remembered her clearly. I could picture her perfectly, especially because the last time I'd seen her, she was sick. One day, I was in a small town near my home in New England, waiting for the bus after a movie night with some friends. It was the 80s. I was just sitting there, lost in thought, when I noticed a woman in a cream-colored dress walking toward me. She reminded me of my grandmother. As she drew closer, it hit me. This was my grandmother. She didn't look at me, just kept walking in a straight line, moving with a purpose. I was frozen, too stunned to say anything or even move. She walked right past me and disappeared in the blink of an eye. It felt like a dream, but I knew it wasn't. Later, I told my dad about it, and he wasn't surprised. My grandmother had lived nearby and often walked past that very bus stop. I think she was just reminding me that I hadn't forgotten her. The second vision I had was more unsettling, almost like a warning. I was 16 at the time and had this sudden compulsion to ride my bike down to a quiet stretch of river near an old neighborhood. It was late afternoon, and the area was nearly deserted, just a few construction sites and empty lots by the water. As I pedaled along a new bike path, I saw a tall man standing in the middle of it. He had long black hair, dark skin, and eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. He was holding a bottle wrapped in a brown paper bag and stared into the distance, seemingly oblivious to everything. There was something about him that terrified me. I turned my bike around and pedaled away as fast as I could. When I looked back, he was gone. The path he had been standing on was open, no trees or buildings for him to hide behind. I didn't understand it, but something inside me knew I wasn't supposed to go any further. Not long after that, I heard about 2 young girls who had been attacked near the river by a killer. I'm not saying the man I saw was the killer, but I think he was there to stop me from getting involved that day. I've never forgotten how my gut told me something was off, how that pure instinct to run saved me. The third vision happened years later, in the 90s, at my sister's house in an old town in Pennsylvania. This town had a dark past. Rumors of old hauntings and unsolved mysteries lingered, and the house was over 100 years old. One late afternoon, I had taken the kids for a walk around the block, and as I was heading back to the house, I saw an old man standing at the gate. He was dressed in a suit with a fedora on his head. It struck me as odd since it was a hot day, and he seemed completely out of place. He didn't walk up to the gate. He just appeared there, standing still for a moment before turning and walking away, vanishing before my eyes. When I got back to the house, I asked my sister if she'd seen him. She had, but thought he was just a neighbor or someone lost. She said she had told him they didn't live there anymore, and he'd shuffled off, but I didn't see him walk away. I saw him vanish. My sister didn't seem overly concerned, but she moved out soon after. Looking back, I think these visions came when I was at peace, when my mind was clear. Maybe I was just more open to sensing things beyond the ordinary. Each time felt like time had stopped. There was no sound, no movement, not even a car on the road. even if it was a busy time of day. What's strange is that all these encounters happened between 4 and 5 p.m., almost exactly the same time. I'm not sure why, but that detail sticks with me. Over time, I've learned to trust my instincts and my eyes, especially when something strange happens, something that's hard to explain but feels undeniably real. When I was a child living in a small town in upstate New York, my grandmother passed away unexpectedly in the hallway of our home. It wasn't long after that, when I entered my teenage years and craved more space, that I moved into the bedroom she had once stayed in. It was the largest room in the house, but it carried a strange history and an unsettling atmosphere that I couldn't shake. From the moment I settled in, I started hearing footsteps echoing in the hallway at night. At first, it was just the faint sound of shuffling, and sometimes the floorboards in my room would creak, as if someone was walking just outside the door. The noises were unsettling, but what terrified me the most were the fingers. Lying in bed, I would often feel what seemed like the gentle, curious touch of fingers brushing against my face. It happened so frequently that, over time, I developed a routine. I would brush away the sensation and whisper, "Go away, please. Let me sleep." Pretending to be unaffected was the only way I knew to cope with it. I tried to explain what was happening to my parents, but they brushed it off, claiming I was just imagining things. So I stopped talking about it and endured the strange occurrences alone. One night, as I was getting ready to sleep, I noticed a faint ticking sound coming from the far corner of my room. It was a noise I couldn't place. There was nothing in my room that could have made such a sound. Curious but apprehensive, I climbed out of bed to investigate. As soon as I flipped the light switch, the sound stopped. I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me and crawled back into bed. A few weeks later, the ticking returned. This time, it was louder and more persistent, impossible to ignore. I decided to get up and investigate again, but I deliberately avoided turning on the light. As I crept through the dark, the sound grew more complex. It wasn't just ticking. I could hear the faint turning of tiny wheels, and something that sounded like the delicate whirring of springs, like the inner workings of an old-fashioned wind-up toy. The noise seemed to be coming from the far corner of the room, near the floor. My fear wavered, but my curiosity pushed me forward. On my hands and knees, I inched closer to the sound, my heart hammering in my chest. As I approached, the noise became overwhelming, almost as if it were alive, right there in front of me, but I couldn't see a thing. When I leaned in even closer, it was as if I had stepped into the very heart of an invisible machine. The sound of gears clicking, turning, and whirring was so vivid it felt as though they were spinning around my head. That was when panic set in. I shot to my feet, my pulse racing in terror. Every instinct told me to turn away, but I couldn't stop. Desperate to get to the bottom of it, I rushed to the light switch and flicked it on. The room was suddenly bathed in light, and the noise was gone. The corner where the sound had originated was empty, silent. The ticking never returned. However, the footsteps, the shuffling, and the eerie sensations stayed with me long after I left my parents' house. Looking back, the experience feels surreal, like a haunting that might have only lived in my mind. But a part of me still wonders, what was it that I really heard in that room?